prayers.
Let us pray. Almighty God, who in thy infinite wisdom and providential goodness has appointed the offices of rulers and councils for the welfare of society and the just government of man, we beseech thee to behold with thy abundant favor us thy servants, whom thou hast been pleased to call to the performance of such important trust in this our island. Let thy blessing descend upon us here in assembly gathered, and grant that we may, as in thy presence, treat and consider all matters that shall come under our deliberations in so just and faithful a manner as to promote thy honor and glory, and to advance the good of those whose interest thou hast committed to our charge. All which we seek in thy name, and for the sake of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. You may be seated.
Motion for the approval of the order paper as circulated.
Madam President, I rise to move a motion for the acceptance of the order paper as circulated.
Madam President, I rise to second the motion.
The question is that the order paper as circulated be approved. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Messages from the Deputy Governor General.
There are no messages.
Announcements by the President.
Good morning, members of the House. Good morning to the members of the public, those of you in the gallery. There are no general announcements. Just to say by way of information, we did receive correspondence from the Honorable Member for Nevis 1 in relation to potential delay in his attendance this morning, as well as correspondence from the Honorable Member for Nevis 5 to advise of her inability to attend the sitting this morning as she's currently unwell. Thank you.
Papers to be laid. Statements by ministers.
Recognize the Honorable Member.
Madam President, colleagues, members opposite, ladies and gentlemen of the gallery, listening public online, good morning. Madam President, I take this opportunity to update the general public on some of what has been happening within the Ministry of Health, Gender Affairs, and Social Empowerment. In the month of October, we recognized quite a number of significant dates and events. Those would have included Breast Cancer Awareness Month, celebrated as Pinktober in October. So October would have seen quite a number of sensitization and awareness initiatives from within the Ministry of Health, as well as through public-private partnerships. We had a number of breast screenings at the various health centers across the islands, and I am taking this opportunity once again to highlight to the public that we are still offering free mammogram services at the Alexandra Hospital until December 31st, 2024. So I'm imploring everyone who has not taken up this opportunity as yet, please make your appointment with your doctor, get a doctor's referral, and make that appointment to get your free mammogram services. while encouraging the public to do this, it was brought to our attention that it is still challenging for some individuals to be able to afford the regular doctor's fee. And we want to be able to make this service accessible to all. So we collaborated with the doctors that are placed on the district in our health centers, and we were able to make sure that if you visit these doctors, you will also have access to get a referral free of cost. So for information purposes, the doctor's clinic sessions at the different health centers are Mondays at the Butler's Health Center from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m., Tuesday at the Brownhill Health Center from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m., Wednesdays at the Gingerland Health Center and Cotton Ground Health Center from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m., and Thursday at the Charlestown Health Center, 9 a.m. to 11 a.m., and Friday at the Combermere Health Center, 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. So we have no excuse for not taking care of ourselves. Please go get your mammogram. We also recognize International Day of the Girl Child in October, and this is a day to recognize the value of our girls and to help our girls to recognize the value of themselves. So through education, they would have had a number of activities within the schools to encourage girls to celebrate and value themselves. And within the Department of Gender Affairs, we recognize a number of girls across Nevis in all of the schools as the Girl of Excellence for 2023. Madam President, October was filled, as I mentioned, so October also was the month of the older persons. So in this month, we saw our seniors march. We saw a vibrant sports day with our seniors. They were very active. Cricket, they had needle threading. They carried sticks, bundles of sticks on their head. For those who weren't physically able, we had the word find activity. And it was an excellent community-spirited activity where the seniors got to be active, healthy, and engaged. They also had a 70s-themed seniors bashment, which was well attended, and I'm thanking the general public for its support, as well as the inaugural elocution contest, which saw the different seniors community groups competing against each other, and they were all winners in my book because I was thoroughly entertained. Mental Health Awareness Week was also celebrated in October, Madam President, and in recognition of that, one of the major activities that would have taken place is a training session between the Ministry of Health and PAHO, where we had a 3-day workshop in crisis intervention for first responders. And this crisis intervention focused on mental health. So oftentimes our police, medical personnel are called out to deal with individuals suffering from mental health issues, and we thought it critical to be able to sensitize them and give them the appropriate tools to be able to handle these cases in the most humane and effective way possible. Madam President, we have rolled over into the month of November, and that brings us to International Men's Month. So International Men's Day was celebrated on Sunday, November 19th. So happy belated Men's Day to all the men in the room and all the men who can hear the sound of my voice. We're celebrating this month with a number of activities, including our signature Men Can Cook, podcasts, panel discussions, church services, and our award ceremony this Saturday, where 9 men from Nevis and 9 men from St. Kitts will be awarded. And this will be a joint ceremony between us and the Gender Affairs Department on St. Kitts. Someone asked me the question of why we're celebrating Men's Day because men are not marginalized. And we understand that while men might not be seen as a marginalized group, this month is about recognizing the positive role models, those who are contributing positively to the environment, promoting gender equality, and we are also addressing some of the unique challenges faced by men. So this year it's being celebrated under the theme Men's Health Matter. And we recognize that quite often it is not seen as masculine to speak about your emotional health or your mental health or even your physical health. And this month helps us to be able to shine a spotlight on some of those issues. I want to take this opportunity because in the Ministry of Health we also recognize that more women access our health services than our male counterparts. And that's not an indicator that they're more healthy, just that they access the services less. So we're encouraging our men to take care of your health, not only for you, but for yourself and your family. Interestingly enough, Madam President, the data shows that men who are married live longer than those who are not married. So that might be a plug for those who are on the fence and thinking about it. You get an additional few years of life if you tie the knot. Health tip for the day. Madam President, while we're on the matter of health, I want to use this platform to raise a critical issue that we are facing in the public, in our community right now, and that is a recent surge in dengue fever cases. Dengue fever is a serious illness, and it's caused by a virus transmitted through the bite of an infected mosquito. It's imperative that we address this matter as soon as possible. Oftentimes we hear dengue fever and it's not taken quite as seriously as some of the other diseases. I think in our minds it's a flu, but the dengue fever can also be fatal, and we don't want to wait until we get to that point to recognize the seriousness of the issue. So some of the symptoms can range from mild to severe, and they include high fever, pain behind the eyes, joint and muscle pains, rash, and the disease can also come in extreme cases where it can cause serious bleeding and a sudden drop in blood pressure, and that can cause shock or death. 1 in 20 individuals who are infected with dengue can develop serious dengue, and we cannot wait for this to happen before we address the issue. So the Ministry of Health is doing a number of activities to try and tackle this, and that includes community fogging, sensitization, cleanup measures, identifying vector areas and breeding sites. But it cannot be done by the ministry alone, and I know the public often calls for more fogging. Fogging only takes care of adult mosquitoes, and that is not enough to squash the problem. We have to be able to eliminate the breeding ground, and we also have the risk of mosquitoes building up a resilience to the chemicals if we use it too often. So with that in mind, we are calling on the entire Nevision public, the general public in the Federation, to look around your yard, look around your homes, identify any stagnant water that's settling. You know, some of us has drums in our yard, or we have, even if you have a plant and the base of it might have water settling, you have to identify those areas and be able to clean them out quite regularly to be able to stop these breeding grounds. As some personal measures, you can also utilize wear long sleeves, mosquito nets, install screens in your home to be able to reduce your risk of getting infected and thus spreading. So it is critical, if you do realize that you have symptoms, that you seek medical attention so that we can have early detection and then provide proper care. As a community, we must come together to be able to address and tackle this threat. So if you see members of the Ministry of Health team coming around and speaking to you, identifying areas in your yard or your communities, please engage with them, please listen attentively and put some of the measures that they are suggesting in place. You'll be hearing a lot more regarding this issue in the upcoming weeks. So Madam President, I want to thank you for indulging me and the general public for listening, and I hope you're able to act on some of these recommendations that have been provided today. Thank you, Madam President.
Recognize the member for Nevis 3.
Madam President, I rise, with your leave, to give an update with regards to some of the activities in terms of my ministry as well. And I greet all of the folks on this side, the other side, and all of those who are here in Parliament today. And I will start first, Madam President, by addressing our fishers, because today is World Fisheries Day. And I would like at this point to salute all of our fishermen, all who are involved in fishing, all who are involved in that very noble profession. And of course, it is celebrated across the United Nations. And it is being celebrated under the theme this year, Cast the Net. And of course, that is inspired by the biblical passage in the book of John, chapter 21 and verse 6. Madam President, I want to let our fishermen know that they are appreciated highly by the Nevis Island Administration, by myself as the minister, from, of course, the Department of Marine Resources. Of course, we know that fishing is a very, very risky business. And it is not everyone who have the courage to be a fisherman. And of course, we have to salute our fishermen who take a lot of time and energy. And sometimes they spend practically all day on the water. And of course, we know there are times when we hear remote cases where we find fishermen go out to sea, and for whatever reason, they do not come back. So it is important that we show our fishermen how important they are. And it is important that at all times we keep our fishermen and their families in our prayers, because we know how the ocean can get at times. And so we salute them. I know sometimes the fishermen tend to believe that they do not get enough support from us as at the ministry, but I want to let them know that we are here to support them. Of course, you know that, and of course all of us would know, that since COVID in particular, we would have placed a lot of emphasis on agriculture, and that includes the fishing industry as well. And so some of the concessions, some of the support that was given to our farmers was also given to our fishermen. I want at this time, as we celebrate World Fisheries Day, to also admonish our fishermen to kindly try to be as respectful as possible to the sustainability of the fishing, the sustainability of the marine resources. I want to encourage our fishermen to try not to overfish, try not to take the undersized lobsters, the undersized fish, because we have to leave some for other days to come. I want the fishermen at all times to respect the off-season when it comes to turtle harvesting and so on. And so I'm encouraging the fishermen. I know it is your trade. I know it is a trade in which you have to make a living. But we have to realize that if we overfish and we take the undersized marine resources, there will be none left for the weeks and the months and the years to come. And so I'm encouraging our fishermen. I want also as well, Madam President, to encourage us, because the fishermen depend on the ocean. And I've said at this podium on many occasions that we must at all times try to ensure that our marine environment is in pristine condition so that our marine life could thrive. And when our marine life thrives, our fishermen can thrive in the industry. And so I'm making a call once again to all residents and nationals of this beautiful island of Nevis, and of course the extension, the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, to kindly desist from indiscriminate dumping. When we dump in the guts, most of what we dump in the guts end up in the ocean, and it pollutes the ocean. And when it pollutes the ocean, the marine life that is in the ocean consumes the polluted garbage, and it ends back up in our system at times. I recall I would have spoken about plastics and the risk of marine plastics getting into the fish or the marine life, and then we consuming that, and that could be carcinogenic. And so I'm sounding the warning once again to all of us to be responsible. Try not to do indiscriminate dumping. We have a landfill, and of course it is not very expensive to take your garbage to the landfill. It's very disheartening, Madam President, when we go around and we see all the garbage in the guts. So I'm asking us to support our fishermen and to ensure that the marine environment remains pristine. And so I want to take this opportunity to wish our fishermen and all involved in fishing a happy World Fisheries Day. I also want to encourage us for this week to support by eating more seafood. When you go to the restaurants, when you go to the hotels, order a seafood lunch or a seafood dinner. And I want at this time as well just briefly highlight the rest of the activities for this week, because the Department of Marine Resources in St. Kitts and Nevis, they have arranged a number of activities. There was a beach cleanup in Nevis earlier this week. It was addressed by the ministers both on St. Kitts and Nevis. Yesterday was Wear Blue Day. Today is Media Day. On Wednesday we have staff development seminar. On Thursday we have talks in schools. And Thursday is Seafood Thursday at the Nevis Fisheries Complex. And so you can go and get all of your fisheries or your marine or your seafood delicacies at the Fisheries Complex on Thursday. On Friday, there's a Fish Fry Friday at the Bastia Fisheries Complex. And on Saturday, there's a beach cleanup in St. Kitts as well. And so I'm encouraging us all during this week. Today, let us salute and pay homage to our hard-working fishermen. Turning to agriculture, Madam President. And of course, I'll have a lot more to say about agriculture in the budget when it comes up very shortly. But I think it is important and timely that I update very briefly on some happenings in agriculture in my ministry and in my department. And Madam President, I want to say here that there has been a lot of good things happening in the agriculture sector, in the agriculture industry here on the island of Nevis. And it's because why so many things are, good things are happening, why we have received the attention of persons in our neighboring islands. During the past couple of weeks, Madam President, we've had numerous visits. And we would have had visit from officials from the Park Hyatt Hotel in St. Kitts who came to visit us and to see what we are doing and what we have to offer. And I can say that since that visit from the officials of Park Hyatt, the orders are rolling in at the abattoir, they're rolling in at the agro-processing center. And so what we are doing, people are looking at what we are doing. I can also indicate to the listening and the viewing public and to all here that we would have had a visit from some farmers, a delegation of farmers from St. Kitts just across the water. And they came to see what we are doing. It shows that what we are doing is resonating across the water, and it is resonating in the sub-region. And so we had a number of farmers who came over from St. Kitts, from the St. Kitts Consortium. And Madam President, those farmers were blown away. And when I say blown away, and impressed with what we are doing here on the island of Nevis. There has been a video that has been circulating, and of course the comments that are coming from our farmers really should make us, all of us on the island of Nevis, very proud. Then, the following day, we had a visit, a team of 6 from the Ministry of Agriculture in Anguilla. And let me say here boldly that none of these visits we asked them to pay. They did it on their own. They wanted to come to see what we are doing. So we had a delegation of 6 from the Ministry and the Department of Agriculture in Anguilla. They came to see what we are doing, to see how they can adopt what we are doing in their circumstances there. And here again, Madam President, they were impressed. Madam President, the following day, so that was 3 days in a row, we had 3 persons from Antigua. And they came because they are beginning to see a problem with the green vervet monkey. They are aware that we have this problem here in St. Kitts and Nevis, and so they wanted to come to see what we are doing here, to see what best practices they can adopt before the situation gets too bad in Antigua. And so they came, and we were able to take them around to show them what we are doing in terms of the control. And here again, Madam President, they were impressed. And the good thing about it is, they came to look at what we are doing. But when they came, they said boldly that this is just the start of a relationship that will commence between the department here and the department in Antigua, where they want to come and see more of what we are doing. Madam President, last week we also had a training for poultry production. And of course, we have said much about the broiler production industry that we are intending to set up here on the island of Nevis. And through the partnership with IECA, we were able to get a consultant from Trinidad who was here for almost a week. He would have done training in Nevis. He would have done training in St. Kitts. Here again, Madam President, the gentleman was impressed with what we are doing. He would have seen the equipment that we purchased, impressed with the equipment that we purchased, and he has committed to assisting us in terms of the development of that industry. Only this morning, before I came to Parliament, I had another visit of a gentleman from FAO in Barbados, and he's here in the Federation to look at digitization of the agricultural sector. So, Madam President, our agriculture industry and sector on the island of Nevis is going places. I salute again the good folks at the Ministry and the Department of Agriculture, and together we will continue to be the beacon of agriculture in the sub-region. May it please you, Madam President.
Recognize the member for Nevis 2.
Good morning, Madam President. Good morning to the members of the House, those on the government side, those in opposition. I rise just to make a brief statement on the issue of geothermal development, energy development here on the island of Nevis. Madam President, yesterday in the National Assembly, my colleagues and I who are there present were able to make a contribution to a resolution passed in the National Assembly yesterday, and I should say it was unanimously supported by all who were present. And that resolution sought to signify in a very real way to the people of the Federation, the region, and the wider world that St. Kitts and Nevis, Bastia and Charlestown are equally committed to the exploration and development of the geothermal resource on Nevis. And the intention, Madam President, is for us to work together to harness this resource for the benefit of all the people of the Federation. We have heard over the years a lot of talk about geothermal. We have had efforts made by successive governments in this regard, but the reality is that it has been some 20 years since this journey started, and today we still do not have geothermal energy in our homes. As a consequence, we view what happened yesterday as a watershed event. No longer will there be different and discordant notes being sounded, information of different kind being disseminated, but for the first time, Bastia and Charlestown will be on the same page in relation to this. Why is that relevant? Madam President, it is relevant because, as we all know, Nevis does not have standing in the international community on its own. And oftentimes when we engage with international agencies or with third-party governments. They want to know what the position of the federal government is in relation to these matters. We have had, for example, some $17 million approved by the Caribbean Development Bank. And that was not possible except for the intervention of the Prime Minister, Dr. Terence Drew, on St. Kitts, who needed to write to the Development Bank to say that the federal government supports this project in order for the Development Bank to take it forward. So I just want the people of Nevis to understand and appreciate that approaching this as a joint venture, a venture that is intended to benefit all of the people of the Federation, is the pathway to realize this potential of geothermal for the benefit certainly of the people here on the island of Nevis, where the resource is located, but also to provide cheaper, cleaner energy to our brothers and sisters on St. Kitts as well. I feel that yesterday was significant, and I wanted to report to this Honorable House, coming as it is, the sitting coming as it is, just the day after, that I felt we did something truly historical and truly important yesterday in the National Parliament in St. Kitts. I was particularly pleased that my colleagues there, the Honourable Member who's here from St. George, and the Honourable Member who's not here from Nevis 11, that we were all able, to lend our voices in support and to record our support of what will now be a national effort in relation to a national resource and making that national resource available to all of the people of the Federation. If we can achieve this, Madam President, it means that the people of Nevis get cheap, clean energy. If we can achieve this, it means the people of St. Kitts now get clean, cheap energy. If we can achieve this, it means that the entire Federation weans itself off fossil fuels. It means that the entire Federation insulates itself from the exogenous shocks that we are constantly seeing of wars and rumors of wars, of OPEC and organizations such as those that control the world petroleum industry, of the increasing costs of fuel. Fuel, as we know, Madam President, powers the world. It powers economies. And whenever the cost of fuel escalates, it means that our people are forced to pay more. We pay more for transportation. We pay more in terms of food prices. We pay more to cool and heat our homes. We pay more for electricity. We pay more. It is perhaps the biggest factor that impacts in a significant way the cost of living. Most of us, when we assess what our household expenditures are like, electricity is perhaps one of the higher items, probably maybe just a little under food or maybe close to food in terms of what we spend. And so the ability for us to deliver clean, cheap energy to our people is absolutely critical. And with that clean, cheap energy, it means, Madam President, we can do other things. For example, desalination to solve water problems becomes an option. We are surrounded by ocean. Currently, it is not a viable option because of the cost of electricity. The ability to have more water means that all of our farmers can now access water. We have water in abundance. It means we can now attract new industry. Energy-intensive industries can now come to us. We're talking about even new steps such as hydrogen, ammonia. These are all now within reach because of the vast deposits of energy that we have here on the island of Nevis. And so I definitely want to say to this House that I think that yesterday was a watershed event, that we took a quantum leap forward in terms of our approach as a nation to national assets and national development. And that, Madam President, when we look at nations across the globe, we look at Saudi Arabia, we look at the United Arab Emirates, everybody wants to go to Dubai. We look at Norway. We look at so many of these countries that have developed, and we can see that they've developed in large part because they have energy. That has been the driving force. Saudis have oil, Norway has oil. UAE, particularly in Abu Dhabi, they have oil. And so we can see what energy independence has done for those countries. And I believe that we are now one step closer to achieving that same objective for us. Imagine a world, Madam President, where we are no longer concerned about what's happening in the rest of the world in terms of oil prices. Imagine a world where wars and rumors of wars outside our borders do not impact the cost of bus fare here in Nevis anymore. Imagine a world where we can say to everybody in the country that you can now have electricity at affordable costs, that it is no longer crippling for the people. And even though as a government we have removed the fuel surcharge from domestic users, I want our people to understand that it comes at a cost, because the government has been forced to find money to subsidize. You would recall, Madam President, that we responded to the cries of our people about the escalating cost of electricity by removing the surcharge from domestic users. But that doesn't mean that it's free. Still means that it has to be paid for. And every month, NEVLEC, a state-owned entity, has to find anywhere from $3 to $4 million to pay Delta for diesel alone. That's nothing to do with operating costs, nothing to do with salaries, just for diesel, every single month. Imagine a world where those payments are no longer necessary, where we no longer have to worry about fossil fuels. Imagine a world where all of the vehicles parked outside are now electric vehicles, electric scooters, where the lights here and the AC that we are now enjoying is all powered by geothermal energy, by renewable energy, by clean energy that does no damage to the environment. That is the world that we are seeking to achieve. And I want to publicly commend the federal government for this initiative. It is as a result of discussions and negotiations between myself, representing the Nevis Island Administration, and the Honorable Prime Minister, Dr. Drew, representing the federal government. And I believe that the discordant notes that were being hitherto sent to the international community have now been put to rest, and that the international community now recognizes that we are ad idem, we are of the same mind in relation to moving this particular project forward for the benefit of all the people of the country. I want to commend, while I'm on my feet, the relationship between NEVLEC and SCELEC, that our technicians are working very closely together. And I believe, Madam President, that I can say that the only thing that has changed is the attitude. And it just speaks to having the right approach and the right attitude and engaging with each other on the basis of mutual respect. A lot can be achieved. Because we have known that geothermal is existing, and we have known that geothermal is the answer. We have known that for a long time. But we had some unseen kids who kept trying to, how should I say, slow the process or stall the process, to the point where there were even some declaring that Sinkits will pursue their own geothermal, knowing full well that Sinkits does not have any geothermal deposits. And so now with a change of attitude, that's all. A new person in Bastille as the Prime Minister, a change in attitude, and here we are, being able yesterday, for the first time in the history of this 20-year odyssey, to have a resolution passed in the National Assembly saying that we, Sinkits and Nevis, jointly support this important national development for the benefit of our entire country. I believe that that is worthy of commendation, and I wanted to report on that because I think, Madam President, that that is, as I've said, a watershed moment in the history of St. Kitts and Nevis and the relations between these two islands, one country. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Personal explanations. Public business. Bill second and third readings.
Madam President, I rise to commence the discussion and debate and to move the second reading of the bill shortly entitled Integrity in Public Life Amendment Bill 2023. Madam President, the bill was first introduced on the 6th of November 2023. And recognizing the importance of the bill, the government took the position that the bill ought to be read a first time and that we ought to then adjourn and give the public an opportunity to see what was being proposed and to give their feedback. I can say, Madam President, that there has been considerable feedback on the provisions and that many, including private citizens, have contacted me and no doubt would have contacted other colleagues in the House about their suggestions as to how we can make what we're seeking to do better. I want to make it pellucid that integrity in public life has to be a way of life for us. And I feel particularly proud that it is this government that would have activated and operationalized this legislation. It is a CCM government that passed the Integrity in Public Life Ordinance at a time when there were some who said that there was no need for such legislation. And it is this government that I'm privileged to lead that operationalized the statute and brought it to life. So much so that we have been filing our statements of assets and liabilities on the island of Nevis now, I believe, for the past 4 years. We compare that to our sister St. Kitts, where integrity in public life legislation was also passed. And I believe that they've only now started to file statements from those persons who are caught by the legislation. And so we are several years ahead in terms of what we've been doing in Nevis. Now, Madam President, the legislation that we're seeking here to amend was passed since 2013. It came into force on the 20th of June, 2018. And we have come back from time to try to improve it. Now, I think that the people of Nevis need to appreciate the history and the background. We campaigned and made a pledge that we wanted greater transparency in government. We wanted greater openness in government. This legislation was an important part of that. And incidentally, we were behind a lot of other Caribbean countries, Trinidad and Tobago, Dominica, Jamaica, that have done similarly. We were actually behind. But we felt it important. And when the movement at the federal level was slow, we decided that we will move here in Nevis and do this. So today, as I stand, we have had a 10-year track record of trying to do this and trying to get this right. Is it perfect? Nothing in the world is perfect. In fact, just over the past few days, I have been reading of news in Jamaica. And right now, there are great concerns in Jamaica, great issues of public debate about how the Integrity in Public Life Commission is operating, whether certain reports and certain members of the Jamaican Parliament that are impacted, how those reports are to be handled. So it tells us that even in countries where there is a longer history of integrity in public life legislation and its functioning, that nevertheless, Madam President, they too are continuing on a quest to get it right. It is an ongoing effort, and from time to time, as issues arise, we will have to come in here and amend. Maybe we did an amendment 2 years ago that seemed to be an important and necessary amendment, but then with the benefit of time, we realized that we need to change that. It is an evolving process, and no one out there should look at that evolution as a bad thing. It is, as we go, we learn, we adapt, we improve. It is an ongoing effort on the part of this government. But it is an effort that speaks, Madam President, to our commitment to greater openness and good governance. We have said that these principles for us are not just lip service. We are committed to them. And good governance isn't just in passing legislation. It's ensuring that we are filing our returns as required by law. It's ensuring greater openness and accessibility. It is evidencing itself even in us coming to this house at far more frequent intervals than we used to. Because this is the people's house. This is the opportunity, Madam President, for government and opposition alike to speak to the issues affecting the island and affecting their constituents. I have instituted, for the 6 years that I've been privileged to lead this island, the Premier's press conference every month, where members of the press, who are largely referred to as the fourth arm of government, the fourth estate as they call themselves, that they come and they ask questions and have an opportunity to engage. That again is new. Some people may look at it and take it now for granted, but it never happened prior to this administration. All of these are examples of greater openness. So the integrity in public life legislation has to be viewed in that context of an island and a government which is trying to be more open, more transparent, and to allow our public to have greater confidence in the men and women that they elect, and the men and women who sit in cabinet, and also the men and women who sit in other places and other positions that are caught by the legislation. Now, why are we here today? Madam President, I will take us to our Constitution. And our Constitution, that is the St. Kitts Nevis Constitution, which became the supreme law of the land in September of 1983, when this country on the 19th of September was born. And we know that the Constitution, under our system, our legal system, is the highest law of the land. Any other law must comply with the Constitution. And if there is any attempt to breach the Constitution through any law, that law is liable to be struck down by the courts as being unconstitutional and therefore void and of no effect. It is the Constitution, Madam President, and the rights and responsibilities that it speaks to that frames how we exist, frames how we relate to each other. It frames the limits of those rights and obligations. The Constitution goes further because it also sets out how the various parts of the state are to function. It speaks, for example, to the Parliament. It speaks to the Governor General. It speaks to an independent judiciary. It speaks to the Public Service Commission, Boundaries Commission, Electoral Commission, Supervisor of Elections, Director of Public Prosecutions. All of these offices are constitutionally provided for and spoken to. And at Section 58 of the Constitution, it speaks to the position of leader of the opposition. I believe that it's important because I have listened to some of the commentators who sometimes engage their mouths before they engage their minds. And as a consequence, we tend to have something akin to, is it flotsam or jetsam? Sometimes I get confused between the two, but both are floating aimlessly on the ocean. Flotsam or jetsam, you choose which one you would like to use. But you get these people who start to rant and rave and create great public anxiety in circumstances where they have no clue what they're talking about. They have not bothered to even pick up the Constitution to determine what the Constitution says and what is provided for. So I have actually brought the document, Madam President, and I have asked the House and the public to look at Section 58, Leader of the Opposition. And I want to read it into the record so that Hansard can record that at subsection 1, 58.1, there shall, except at times when no representative is eligible for appointment, be a leader of the opposition in the National Assembly who shall be appointed by the Governor General. And if you will permit me, Madam President, the provisions of Section 58 have, by virtue of Section 104 of the Constitution, been adopted to apply to the island of Nevis. And so at Section 104, it references at subsection 1 thereof, Section 58, as one of those provisions that applies, mutatis mutandis, I think they say in the courts. It applies in the same way to Nevis as it does to the National Parliament. So if you'll permit me, Madam President, when I go to the provisions, I will read them as if we are in Nevis, because that's where we are. And that they apply to Nevis because the Constitution in Section 104 says that they do. So let me read it again. There shall, except at times when no representative is eligible for appointment, be a leader of the opposition in the Nevis Island Assembly, who shall be appointed by the Governor General. Now, I want to pause there because the language of Section 58.1 recognizes that there may be times when there's nobody who is eligible to be leader of the opposition. The bracketed portions says, except at times when no representative is eligible for appointment. So the Constitution, and I want to go on record, you know, sometimes our people have short memories. CCM did not frame this Constitution. When this Constitution came into effect in 1983, the Concerned Citizens Movement was not yet formed. So I hear a lot of noise and fury, as if somebody is to be blamed for what the principal law, the supreme law of the country says. But we were not around. The party was not in existence. And certainly nobody sitting on this side was in government or in any position. I'm not sure all of us were even born. You were born in 1983. No, some of us weren't even born yet, Madam President. So this document dates back to the 19th of September, 1983. I was a boy, and some of us were not yet born. So if anybody has a problem with the document, they must ask who drafted and who brought it into being. And all I can say, like Shaggy, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. So 58.1 says that there shall be a leader of the opposition, except when no representative is eligible for appointment. That's what it says. Now, we go on to section 2. It says, whenever there is occasion for the appointment of a leader of the opposition, the Governor General shall appoint the representative who appears to him or her most likely to command the support of a majority of the representatives who do not support the government. Put differently, we have the government over here. The Governor General is going to look over there, opposite side. Over there, they don't support the government. That's where the Governor General must look to determine which of the representatives commands the support of a majority of those over there who do not support the government. That's what the Constitution is asking us to do. Or, it goes on, if no representative appears to him or her to command such support, the representative who appears to him or her to command the support of the largest single group of representatives who do not support the government. A good example of that is the current situation in St. Kitts. There are 5 of us in St. Kitts who sit on the opposition benches. CCM has 3 of those seats. PAM has 1, PLP has 1. There are 5 persons there. And so, Section 58.2 allows me as the leader of CCM to be appointed leader of the opposition, because while I am not sure who the PLP representative supports, I am sure that the CCM representatives support me as leader of the opposition. And that means, Madam President, that we have gone to the Governor General and said to the Governor General, listen, that I am the person as the leader of CCM and the party that has 3 of the 5 seats in opposition, the representative who commands the support of the largest single group of representatives. That is the Constitution at work. So that's a perfect example that we can use to explain how this works to the general public. Now it goes on to have a proviso. And it says at 58.2, provided that no representative shall be eligible for appointment unless it appears to the Governor General that that representative commands the support of at least one other representative. That's where the trouble starts. I'm happy you said that. That's where the trouble starts. It says that the leader of the opposition cannot be appointed unless he or she commands the support of at least one other member of the opposition.
This is the Constitution, you say it, right?
It's the Constitution says so, not me. And that is the supreme law. Some commentators are saying, oh, so Brantley and the government could appoint a leader of the opposition if they wanted it. Oh, we should just name so-and-so as leader of the opposition. So does this thing work, you know? I have decided to read the Constitution into these debates so that everybody is clear what the provisions are. I have heard it being said that in the past, people were appointed leader of the opposition. I can't speak to what happened in the past or the propriety or impropriety of it. What I can say is there's no constitutional provision for anybody to be appointed leader of the opposition other than what the Constitution provides. And I've just read what the Constitution provides, Section 58, which is applicable to the island of Nevis by virtue of Section 104. It goes on, but I won't belabor the point because the various provisions aren't germane for the argument that I'm seeking to advance. Now, the leader of the opposition is a critically important position. in our constitutional framework, Madam President. You take various commissions. Let us say, for example, that the island of Nevis wants to change our electoral boundaries. We have 5 seats, and certainly I have felt for some time that 5 seats are quite not enough to run a modern Nevis. The pressures on ministers, especially when you have a majority of 3 to 2, the pressures are immense. We have senators who are being asked to carry some of that load. But there's been some argument that the seats ought to be increased in Nevis. There's a mechanism if that is to be done. That mechanism would require us to appoint an electoral boundaries commission. How is that commission to be constituted? Again, going to the Constitution, the leader of the opposition must appoint members, as well as the government, the premier, must appoint members. We have, at section 30 of the Constitution, I won't take you there, Madam President, but just by way of reference, the appointment of senators. I want the people of Nevis to understand that this House, even as we sit here today, is not properly constituted. What I mean by that is to say that there ought to be a senator sitting on the opposition benches. There ought to be a senator over there. And section 30 of the Constitution makes provision that the leader of the opposition can nominate a senator on the opposition benches. That's where I started my political career. Sitting on over there on them cold hard benches over there. That's how they used to be described. That's where I started in 2006. The role of the leader of the opposition is a critically important constitutional role. But it is not a role that I as Premier can give anybody, that the government can give to anybody. It is a role that is defined by the Constitution as to how it works and how it ought to happen. Now, I come forward to the election of December 12th, 2022. After the votes were counted, it appeared that the Concerned Citizens Movement was able to retain government, but with a reduced number of seats. We had 4 seats going into that election. We emerged with 3. The good member from St. George, the good member from St. Paul's, and yours truly. The main party contesting those elections on the other side, the Nevis Reformation Party, was able to win 2 seats. Number 5, representative is not here today, and number 4, whose representative is here today. One would have therefore thought that those 2 persons running as they did for the same party, winning as they had 2 seats, that one of them would have supported the other to satisfy the requirements of section 58(2). And however they did it, that is their business. But somebody would have emerged as leader of the opposition. That was, I don't think, an unrealistic expectation. On this side over here, somebody emerged as Premier under the Constitution. CCM as a leader, and those who were elected supported the leader to be Premier of Nevis. NRP has a leader, but for whatever reason, the NRP leader could not get the other NRP elected representative to support her to be leader of the opposition. And so the NRP leader is sitting alone in opposition. Lord, they not even couldn't get agreement. They then kicked out the member for number 5. And the member for number 5 is now declared independent. So, the point that I'm trying to make, is that the reason why the Nevis Island Assembly does not have a leader of the opposition has absolutely nothing to do with CCM and the government. It's not up to us. If the opposition cannot get their house in order, if they prefer chaos and confusion, they can't lay that at the feet of anybody over here. They must know what they're doing. They went to people, asked people to vote for them. And after the people vote for them, pure confusion, chaos, war in the camp. Who don't like who are cuss who are give press conference about who. Until the kinny cat, the member for number 5, out of the house, out of the party altogether. Kinny cat, that's parliamentary language. Trushy out. And then, after they have done all that, they start to cuss us. We must appoint leader of the opposition. We must agree that we are somehow operating in a dictatorial way. We are not supporting good governance and good government. Well, my God, how you could lay your problems at my doorstep? We run in our camp over here, our ship sailing, good. Good, we understand what we are doing. If you jump into something and you don't understand where you're going, you don't understand how the thing works, then stay out. Or at least inform yourself. We have had a failure of leadership in the opposition. That's what we have had. And I don't care how anybody tried to sugarcoat it. It has been a colossal blunder, a colossal failure of leadership in the opposition. That is why there's no leader of the opposition. And that is why we're here. You think we don't have other things that we could be doing? We are forced to be here to solve a problem. So let me bring the problem home now for the benefit of our people. Integrity in public life legislation. I have explained the background. It makes a provision at section 3 as to how the commission is to be appointed. And what it tries to do is to create balance, Madam President. Reading from section 3, there is hereby established a commission called the Integrity Commission. The commission shall consist of a chairperson who shall be a retired judge or an attorney at law of at least 15 years standing, appointed by the Deputy Governor General acting on his or her own deliberate judgment. B, 2 other persons appointed by the Deputy Governor General after consultation with the Premier and the Leader of the Opposition as follows. 1 member appointed on the recommendation of the Premier. 2, 1 member appointed on the recommendation of the Leader of the Opposition. Simple structure. 3 members of the Commission, the Chair appointed by the Deputy Governor General in her own deliberate judgment, and the Chair has to be a retired judge or an attorney at law who has had at least 15 years. So somebody who's experienced in the law. And then 2 other people, 1 appointed on the advice of the Premier, and 1 appointed on the advice of the Leader of the Opposition. Well, if the Leader of the Opposition is non-existent because of a failure of leadership in the opposition, then you see what happens? The 3rd member of the commission can't be appointed. So currently, the people of Nevis need to be aware that we have a chairperson in Mr. Ricardo Keynes of the Integrity Commission in Nevis. We have a member appointed on the advice of the Premier in Mr. Sidney Newton. But there is no third member because there is no leader of the opposition, and the members on the opposition are as far apart as day and night. You know what the consequence of that has been, Madam President? The commission is not constituted. Therefore, the commission cannot meet. Therefore, the commission cannot do its work. So the architecture put in place for good governance, for greater openness and transparency has collapsed. And it has collapsed why? Confusion in NRP and confusion in the opposition. That's the reason. Now, we had an integrity commission that functioned before. I indicated that we had had now, I think, 4 years of those caught by the provisions filing their reports. And I have heard the argument being made that there was no leader of the opposition when that integrity commission was appointed. If the public and the House would remember, the then lone representative for the NRP in opposition was Mr. Joseph Parry. And so Mr. Parry did not have any other person that could support him to be leader of the opposition. While I understand the nicety of that argument, in the context of what we were trying to do, Madam President, in terms of bringing integrity in public life into being, creating a culture of disclosure around it, giving our people greater confidence, and in the context of a relationship that existed at the time among politicians who understood that their role in this House was not personal, but for the benefit of the people that they serve, Mr. Parry and I were able to have that rapport and that ongoing dialogue. And I said to Mr. Parry, we need this thing done. While you do not have the title of leader of the opposition, and you have no way to get that title, we suggest that you appoint somebody, suggest somebody, speak to the Deputy GG about somebody who can be on that commission so that the commission can function. Had anybody challenged it legally? Who knows? They might have succeeded. I don't know. But the spirit of what we were trying to achieve was to get the commission functional, get people to start to file, get the island accustomed to the idea that a new way had come in terms of government. But that was only possible because Mr. Parry at the time understood what his role was. Why he was in here, coming here to put on a nice outfit. He come in here to serve the people who sent him in here. And because of that, whatever his personal views of me might have been, I don't know, he said we are cousins. He and I were able to pick up the phone, talk to each other, recognize the difficulty, but find a way to work with each other for the benefit of the people of Nevis and what we are trying to do. That was the relationship. That's how big people operate. When big people are given an opportunity to serve in government and in opposition. Because here, we're in the parliament together. Nobody in here is bigger than anybody else, except you, Madam President. All of us are members, those elected and those who are appointed. That's it. In here, in fact, nobody referred to no premier. You ought properly to be referred to as your constituency. I'm the member for number 2. The honorable member opposite is the member for number 4. Why? Because people vote for the member opposite, just like people vote for me. But our constitutional framework and our democracy expects that people will be able to talk to each other. It expects that there should be some dialogue, like we do. And that's what existed before. Because at any point in time, no matter the public statements that he makes sometimes, that the previous member for number 5, sitting opposite, needed something done. He had an idea to move the island forward. He had constituents that he needed something done. He had no difficulty. We had a relationship. We pick up the phone and we talk to each other. That's what big people do. All of us here are only passing through. We should be trying to do the best for our constituents. It's not about self-aggrandizement. But when you see, Madam President, that some of us do not understand the assignment, so we jump up one day from a deep slumber and we say, here I am, vote for me, vote for me. And somehow they get through. And they reach in here and they don't understand what it is they're supposed to be doing. So first you have war in their own camp. Pure confusion. No leader of the opposition as a result. No senator as a result. And then they don't have the basic ability to communicate and to say, here's my suggestion. Can we work together to find a solution? No. Because suddenly, on this island, people are enemies. People that have known each other all their lives can't speak to each other anymore. Because they say it's politics. I don't understand that. I told you the gentleman who used to sit over there, Mr. Perry, Lord, he says some things about me and I've said some things about him. Whenever I see him, Joe, how you do? Cuz, how you do? We have to be able to maintain some level of civility and some capacity to speak to each other in the interest of the people that we say we serve. But absent that, how are we going to find solutions? How? We have a curious situation existing now in this island, Madam President, where on the 12th of December, which is less than a month away, we would have had a full year of a new government in place. And I can say publicly, because it is true, that I have never once in that year had a word said to me by the leader of the NRP in relation to anything, to do with anything on this island of Nevis. Not one word. Not one letter that I could refer to that came on any matter of national interest, on any position to move Nevis forward, to any idea or thought, or even on behalf of a constituent. I have seen nothing. Is that the way we're going to operate? Well, if that is the case, what is the purpose of people sending people here? We have sometimes to get out of our own way and focus on why we say we're in public life. Why? Can't be for us. It has to be for the people out there. And the people out there demand that leadership be mature and has the ability to communicate with each other, to deal with issues that will arise. You hear what I tell you, go back to Section 58. Section 58 actually contemplates there may be times where nobody is eligible to be leader of the opposition. Here, somebody was eligible, but because of confusion, they became ineligible. Well, somebody over there was eligible. There were two. So somebody could have supported somebody. But the two somebody said they now support any one somebody. I'm even confusing myself with the number of somebodies. The result was that we are where we are. So when people look and say, oh, but Mr. Parry was allowed to appoint somebody. I'm saying that the situation is different. It is different because Mr. Parry was mature enough to have a dialogue and to understand, listen, this is what we're trying to achieve. Let us work together to see how we can do it. And two, it is different because currently we have 2 members on the opposition benches. Just as I pointed out earlier, Madam President, that no member in here is superior to any other. Number 2, number 1, number 2, number 3. All of us are on the same level in this parliament. I may be the leader of government, but beyond that, no seat is superior to any of the others. If that were the case, my seat is the biggest seat. I would have been the most superior of all. But the reality is that the seats are what they are. And on the other side, we have 2 seats, number 4 and number 5. Number 4 has no claim to any superior position to number 5. And number 5 has no claim to any superior position to number 4. I say that to say that absent number 4 and number 5 coming together and saying, Premier, this is what we suggest, then there's nothing that I can do in relation to constituting the Integrity Commission. I have done my part. I have appointed Mr. Sidney Newton. The Deputy GG has done her part. The opposition has failed to do its part. And that is the reality. So I hear some vacuous arguments, or let the leader of NRP appoint somebody because Mr. Parry did it. Mr. Parry was there by himself. Only he was over there. And because we were able to speak to each other as mature individuals, we were able to come to a position that saw Mr. Parry appointing Alfred Tyrrell to the commission. We now have a situation on the other side there, based on all that we've seen play out in public, that I don't even know who I could speak to over there. Because if I speak to the member from number 4, and the member from number 4 say, I want Mr. X to be the person, I would then have to speak to the member from number 5 and say, do you agree? Do you support? And the member number 5 said, Tal, I want Miss Y to be the person. And here we are. Commission can't be constituted, it cannot meet, cannot function. So, we have now had to contend by way of coming here to amend the legislation to say, what happens when there's no leader of the opposition? What happens when the members of the opposition refuse to get along? Should important institutions like the Integrity Commission suffer as a result? And should the entire island be held hostage by the confusion that reigns within the opposition ranks? And our answer is no. As a responsible government, we cannot allow that to happen. And so that is why we find ourselves here. And so the amendment, after feedback from the public, that is what the first reading is intended to do. I believe that a new draft has been circulated, and that new draft is much shorter than the original amendment, because we have decided in this draft, Madam President, in this bill that is currently before the House, to focus principally on the issue of how that 3rd member will be appointed. And so, for the benefit of the public, I had read the current Section 3, which said 3 members, chair appointed by the Deputy GG in her own deliberate judgment, 1 member appointed on the advice of the Premier, 1 member appointed on the advice of the Leader of the Opposition. That's the current state of the law. We know that there's no Leader of the Opposition, And in addition to that, we know that there's confusion on the opposition benches. So not only is there no leader, there will be no consensus and no agreement as to a person. And so we've come to the House now to propose an amendment. And this is what the amendment says. The principal ordinance is amended in section 32B2 by deleting subparagraph 2 in its entirety. So we're taking out subparagraph 2 in its entirety. And so what we are going to leave then is to say that the Integrity Commission shall consist of A, a chairperson, retired judge or attorney at law of at least 15 years, appointed by the Deputy GG in his or her own deliberate judgment, and then B, 2 other persons appointed by the Deputy Governor General after consultation with the Premier and, I should say, that should say opposition. Premier and opposition, and we're looking at the principal ordinance. Yes. So, 2 other persons appointed by the Deputy Governor General after consultation with the Premier and the opposition, if any. So, Madam Legal Advisor, we'll have to address that. As follows. 1, 1 member appointed on the recommendation of the Premier. So that remains, Madam President. And then what we are trying to do with this amendment now is to see how we can solve the problem that the island is confronted with this chaotic, confused, and confusion opposition. So we are saying 2, 1 member appointed on the recommendation of the leader of the opposition. That is, of course, preserving the position as to when there is a leader of the opposition. And then we're adding a new subsection 3. And that subsection 3, sorry, 2B3, will now say, if there is no leader of the opposition, then the Deputy Governor General may appoint a member on the advice of the member or members of the opposition, provided that where there is no member of the opposition or the members of the opposition cannot agree on a nominee, then a member will be appointed on the advice of the Premier after consultation with the members of the opposition, if any. Now, that's a lot of verbiage. Let me try to break it down, Madam President. We're saying that the Integrity Commission going forward is going to be appointed a chair, that's okay. Deputy Governor General. In fact, there's a chair already appointed. 1 member appointed on the advice of the Premier, that's okay. That member is already there. The 3rd member should be appointed on the advice of the leader of the opposition. However, whereas is now, there is no leader of the opposition, then we are saying if there is no leader of the opposition, then the Deputy Governor General may appoint a member on the advice of the member, because sometimes there could only be one, as Mr. Parry was the only one at the time, or members, because now we have 2, although the 2 don't agree, of the opposition. Provided that where there is no member of the opposition, that is a situation where CCM wins all 5 seats, and so there's nobody over there at all, or the members of the opposition cannot agree on a nominee. You see what we're trying to do with this thing? We're saying to the member for number 4 and for number 5, you all, listen, put on some big girl clothes and go and sit down like big people, work out the thing. We got important business to do. Serious business to do. We don't really care. The country doesn't care who like who, you know. We're not interested in that. Who said what about whom? You all represent people, and there is important work to be done in the country. Amen. So this amendment is telling us that if there was only 1 person on the opposition benches, then that 1 person, even though they're not leader of the opposition, would be able to advise the Governor General, Deputy Governor General, as to the appointee to the commission. We've gone further and we've said, where there is more than one person, as is the case today, then let them get together and agree, even though none of them is leader of the opposition. Let them get together and agree a nominee. And then the Governor General will appoint, the Deputy Governor General, forgive me, will appoint that nominee. So if the member for number 4 and the member for number 5 can sit down and say, our nominee is Mr. X, we solve the problem tomorrow. But where there is no member on the opposition because they didn't win a seat, or the members that are over there cannot agree, and based on how things look, I don't know if we will be able to achieve agreement. Miracles do happen. Yes. But based on how things look, I don't know. I'm not a soothsayer. But the legislation, the proposed amendment is saying that the ball is in their court. And well, if they say they cannot agree on a nominee, then the ball is then kicked back over to the government and to the Premier to constitute the commission.
Which needs to be constituted.
After consultation with the opposition. Huh? No, consultation doesn't mean agreement. I don't require their consent. I only need to show that I would have consulted with them. But the proposed amendment puts the responsibility squarely with the member or members of the opposition to come up with a consensus nominee for the Integrity Commission. And that ball only comes back over to the Premier if they fail to do their job. So you know what we're trying to do with this legislation? We're trying to force the opposition to do their job. So we're doing, since they can't do it themselves, Parliament is saying, we're going to force you to do your job. And let them then be able to say to the people of Nevis why they could not put aside whatever differences they have and determine who will serve on the Integrity Commission. This will be yet another test of leadership to determine whether or not they can do it. And what we are saying is if they cannot do it, the country cannot be held hostage by their confusion. And we will have to move on by appointing somebody on the advice of the Premier. It is not the desirable situation. I want the public to know. The desirable situation is what we crafted when we passed the law in the first place. One by the opposition, one by the Premier. Chairperson appointed by the Deputy GG in her own judgment. That was the framework. But that framework anticipates that people will be mature. It anticipates that people who come to politics come for the right reasons. It anticipates that when you persuade people to vote for you and you come in the House, that you understand what your role is and your function is. Not about power, I'm in charge, you must do what I say, otherwise you get kicked out. That's not the way it works. On this side over here, if there's ever any disagreement, there's hardly anybody, if there's any, we discuss.
Oh, yes, sir.
So maturity requires, because the member for number 3 doesn't serve himself. Member for number 1 doesn't serve himself. We answer to the constituents who sent us. A lot of people get lost, you know, Madam President. They get lost. That's the why they're in politics. And what it means to come into this house, that awesome responsibility, but also that awesome privilege. Only very few will ever say that they got the chance to sit in the Parliament of Nevis. And to see people given that chance and waste it because they're more concerned with self-aggrandizement and lust for power. What is the power? A title? Do the job, do the work, And this amendment is saying to the opposition that since you refuse to get your house in order, we will force you to get your house in order. And if you have the opportunity to get your house in order, tomorrow morning the commission can be constituted. Just send up the name, nice little letter. Dear GG, Deputy GG, after consultation, I, the elected member for number 4, and I, the elected member for number 5, agree that Mr. X will be our nominee. You see, problem solved. Problem solved. This government is not seeking to stack the commission with persons sympathetic to the government. The government is asking the opposition to do its job, to be mature, and to understand why they are here and why they ask people to vote for them. That's what we are asking. The other amendment is less significant in that what we are trying to do is just to change the period of appointment. I think the initial legislation contemplated 5 years, 5-year tenure. We think that's too long. And so we have asked that the House adopt a position where we move the tenure of appointment of commissioners from 5 years to 3 years. That will also allow other people to get an opportunity to serve in due course. And then at section 6, we continue with the effort at dealing with the position when there is no leader of the opposition by saying in relation to the removal that the Deputy General, Governor General will consult if there is somebody in office to consult with. I end with just one omnibus point, Madam President. And that is that these types of situations were probably not anticipated by the framers of the Constitution in quite this way. I would probably argue that they were not even anticipated by the people of Nevis in quite this way. But it shows us that the Constitution that has existed now for 40 years, that it might be time for us to have another look 40 years on, with the benefit of those 40 years of experience in trying to work that Constitution. We see, as we saw some time ago, of a motion of no confidence that was not called for 14 months. We see a situation that happened recently of a prime minister being able to fire 6 members, elected members, and continuing to purport to run a government with just 3 members. We see now the scenario where people who are elected into positions in the parliament refuse to get along, and as a consequence there's open warfare and an inability to agree on anything. And so the structure of the Constitution, because it depends and assumes, the framers assume that people will act in a certain way. When people don't act in the way that the framers assume, we end up with chaos. And so it may be time to look at it, because throughout the Constitution, it puts a heavy burden on the leader of the opposition. But yet the very Constitution recognizes that there may be times when there's nobody who's eligible to be leader of the opposition. You see the anomaly? So it recognizes that there may be times when nobody's eligible, but it nevertheless puts significant constitutional responsibility, Electoral Commission, Electoral and Boundaries Commission, on the leader of the opposition, an office which the framers anticipated may at times not be filled. So these are things that need to be looked at. And as I said, not bashing the Constitution, but it's important for me to reiterate that it was not drafted by us over here. And when it came into being, CCM was not yet in existence. May it please you.
gallery and those viewing or listening across our country and across the diaspora. Madam President, I rise to raise a few concerns regarding the Integrity in Public Life Amendment Bill 2023. Madam President, generally, not always, but generally, when something starts wrong, it will end wrong. And it is interesting to hear how one can articulate and weave a narrative that is so unjust and unfair. Madam President, we are not here today regarding the selection of the leader of the opposition. The Constitution is quite clear regarding how the leader of the opposition is selected. And we are aware that there is no leader of the opposition currently, just as there was no leader of the opposition appointed in the Nevis Island Assembly in 2018. And so, Madam President, the Integrity in Public Life Ordinance that was drafted in 2013 or passed in 2013, but not brought into effect until 2018, puts the issues that we're dealing with right now squarely on the shoulders of this CCM administration. Firstly, Madam President, we understand that integrity speaks to being honest and having strong moral principles. We understand the importance of integrity in good governance. And so, Madam President, when we look at the Integrity in Public Life Ordinance, which provides the legal framework to establish the Integrity Commission, we understand, Madam President, that at the time there was no leader of the opposition to give effect to the provisions of the Integrity in Public Life Ordinance. Madam President, as stated before, the ordinance provides that you have a commissioner provided by the Deputy Governor General, appointed by the Deputy Governor General, one on the recommendation of the Premier, and one on the recommendation of the leader of the opposition. Madam President, it is clear that the intent of the ordinance was to ensure that you have inclusiveness, to ensure that we uphold the principles of democracy, and that is why the provision was made for representation from both sides of the House, of the Assembly. And so, Madam President, the level of deception that we have seen should not be tolerated in this honorable House. If a member proposes a bill that is lacking and is regressive, whose responsibility is it to ensure that the principles of democracy and good governance are upheld? We cannot afford for a few self-serving persons to destroy the democracy and the principles upon which this honorable House was founded. Madam President, the mover of the bill, member for Nevis 2, is proposing to amend this ordinance to ultimately give the Premier the authority to select 2 members of the Integrity Commission. And I say that, Madam President, because it is clear that the leader of the opposition can only be appointed by the Governor General or the Deputy Governor General. And the Constitution states clearly how the leader of the opposition should be appointed. And so how now, when it was so clearly stated why we do not have a leader of the opposition, how now can we say, based on the spirit of the ministers and based on the maturity of the ministers, we can make some adjustments to accomplish what we set out to accomplish? Madam President, the Constitution says what it says. The ordinance says what it says. And moving in this regressive direction is not in the best interest of the people of Nevis. It is not in the best interest of our country. Madam President, we listen to an argument being made. And when one can recognize that there was some deviation from the Constitution to advance an ordinance in this honorable House, which was not consistent with the Constitution, one must wonder, if a precedent has been set, why cannot that precedent be furthered? And I can appreciate the Constitution is the land of the law, and wherever ordinances must try to advance the Constitution. And so, Madam President, when we speak of integrity and honesty and inclusiveness and transparency, one would want to ensure that we provide opportunities to include as many persons as possible rather than to exclude. And so, Madam President, when we considered the results of the last election, where the Nevis Reformation Party received 3,543 votes, one would imagine that CCM received 10,000 votes. But by a very slim margin, Madam President, they happen to be in the government at this point in time by a mere 3,930 votes that they won, but are now taking advantage of loopholes in the Constitution or gaps in the Constitution to advance their dictatorial approach to governance. Madam President, at this juncture, barring constitutional reform or the introduction of new legislation, as we have seen done before, we recognize that there are going to be continued issues regarding when there is no leader of the opposition. And so, Madam President, one would imagine that because the leader of the opposition is not limited only to a role in the Integrity in Public Life Commission, that a responsible and forward-thinking government would try to advance a situation that would deal with the matter once and for all. Because what happens when we have the other issues that require the leader of the opposition to take responsibility and to act? We are going to see another piece of legislation to dilute the democratic principles upon which we try to advance the development of our country. Madam President, I would say that while the attempt is being made to sidestep the lack of a leader of the opposition, it must be understood that the Integrity in Public Life Ordinance should have never been constituted because there was no leader of the opposition at that point in time. When compared, Madam President, to the Integrity in Public Life Amendment Act of 2023, passed recently in the Federal Assembly, we would note that that act has the same provision for the inclusion of the leader of the opposition to recommend a member of the commission. And so, Madam President, what is being proposed here is an amendment to create further distance between what is recommended or what is enacted in the federal parliament and what this honorable house would allow to come into effect. And I'm saying, Madam President, when we look at what is being done in the federal house, we can see that the intent of the Constitution is being advanced. We can see that the drafters of the bills are looking to be inclusive and are trying to minimize some of the ambiguities that would have been in the act before. And so, Madam President, when we look at what is in the Integrity in Public Life Ordinance compared to what is in the Integrity in Public Life Act, Madam President, one really must question the usefulness of the Integrity in Public Life Ordinance. Because, Madam President, the amendments that were made to the Act just earlier this year, like I said, has extended the reach to public officials in Nevis. And so the attempt now to create an opportunity to question the integrity of the Nevis Reformation Party because of the failings of the CCM administration, one really must question, are we really proposing amendments to an integrity in public life ordinance? We are not seeing that expressed, Madam President. Even some of the provisions in the existing ordinance, one must question whether or not the abuse of office, whether or not the ability to investigate complaints, whether or not the necessary reports have been filed. These are matters that would really move to strengthen the ordinance. But to create a scenario that the commission is not functioning because of the Nevis Reformation Party, Madam President, again I say, the ordinance ought not to have been constituted because at the time there was no appointed leader of the opposition. That went on for the last 5 years. And now there's some talk that it is because of the opposition why we're here today. We're here today because the ordinance was never properly constituted according to our Constitution, Madam President. Now, we speak about inclusiveness and we speak about working together. But, Madam President, we understand our Constitution, and we know that the framers of the Constitution worked hard to try to ensure that we can advance and uphold democratic principles. But we must also work together. And so Section 103 of the Constitution, while it gives the Nevis Island Legislature the power to make laws, it also says if there is any inconsistency with the provisions of any law enacted by Parliament, the provisions of the law enacted by Parliament shall prevail. And so, Madam President, based on the inconsistency that we are seeing and further inconsistencies that are being proposed, why advance this ordinance or this amendment when we know that the provisions of the law enacted by Parliament shall prevail? Madam President, as mentioned before, the amendments to the Federal Act, which was passed earlier this year, reaches over to include public officials in Nevis. We recognize that there are inconsistencies between what is proposed in the ordinance, what exists in the ordinance. In fact, the ordinance was passed in 2013. And so look at how much would have transpired between 2013 and where we are now. And so this attempt to address this small little section of the ordinance and try to give the impression that the opposition and the party that I lead, the NRP, that stands for integrity and progressiveness, is the reason why the government cannot conduct its business, is another indication of the deceptive nature of the government. Madam President, the current ordinance and the proposed amendment cannot give the people of Nevis any confidence whatsoever that the government offices are operating in a manner that they are required to and expected to. The ordinance has certain objectives, and what is being proposed is not furthering the ability of the Commission to achieve those objectives. Now, Madam President, when we look at how certain arguments can be presented, and we focus not on what is before us, because the amendment that is before us aims to provide an option to exclude the leader of the opposition, or to exclude the inclusiveness of those persons who are represented by persons. And so, Madam President, one must ask, notwithstanding that the Federal Act provides a different language than what is being proposed here, in terms of really wanting to advance the wishes of the people, is this the best that could be presented to address the problem that we're dealing with? Madam President, when we understand that we are looking at developing a sustainable island state, a sustainable island state, Madam President, has certain underpinnings and has certain principles upon which you can be identified as a sustainable island state. Madam President, what is being presented is taking us farther away from sustainability. And, you know, Madam President, when we listen to certain arguments, I mean, if you're making an argument on the wrong issue, it may sound good, and you may say, this makes sense. But that is not the issue at hand, Madam President. And when we look at this type of regressive legislation that is being proposed, I think the members of this honorable House should really question themselves and decide if this is the type of legislation that we want to be associated with. You cannot draft a legislation inconsistent with the federal legislation, giving the Premier more authority than what the legislation, the Constitution anticipated, and feel that we're moving in the right direction towards uplifting democracy and moving towards a sustainable state. Madam President, we met here on November 6th for the first reading, and it was stated that we would pause for consultation. Madam President, I have not heard one word today regarding any consultation that was conducted, the information that was provided. And so we come today as if, because we have the numbers, we can move this atrocious piece of legislation in this honorable House. Madam President, what we are seeing is a lack of consideration for the people of Nevis, the lack of consideration for what is drafted or what is enacted in the Federal House, the lack of consideration of how we are going to uphold our democratic principles and ensure that all of the people that we represent are duly represented. Madam President, it would be instructive and important to hear what the Bar Association, what the Chamber of Commerce, what is the position of the civil society. Because remember, the Integrity Public Life Ordinance is to help ensure that we minimize corruption, help ensure that we present to our people a transparent and accountable government. And if this CCM government is going to present a bill that takes away from those principles of good governance without having an opportunity to register their concerns, then, Madam President, I think we're really moving away from integrity with this Integrity in Public Life Amendment than moving towards more integrity. Madam President, it is interesting, and I'll just say this about the Sustainable Island State agenda that we see so enshrined in this new Labor administration. I mean, it's the heartbeat of the Prime Minister, I would say. And I can see the support of all of his ministers with regards to achieving the Sustainable Island State agenda. But, Madam President, you know, we cannot have a sustainable island state if one part of the state is advancing legislation that upholds democracy, that promotes sustainability and inclusiveness, and the other part of the state is allowed to run rampant and move further away from the very thing that the entire government is trying to move towards. And so I do not think that it is a matter where the overall objective of the government, of the country, is given some attention when it benefits one side and leave the rest unto itself. It's interesting to see the advances towards renewable energy. And it's interesting to see how action can be taken when we see an overall benefit for the country. But, Madam President, this amendment that is presented here today, if it is allowed or if it is supported and passed into law, I think it would make this House the laughingstock of not just the country, not just what the federal government is proposing, but of course the OECS, and also the very convention that was presented that provide the basis of this legislation, Madam President, would be called into question. And so, Madam President, I would just ask the members on the other side, not because there is no leader of the opposition at this point, because the provisions of the Constitution cannot be fulfilled. They were not fulfilled in 2018. And a dilute, very dilute ordinance was passed. And the efforts here today, Madam President, is to further dilute that diluted ordinance And so I'm saying, think of where you would want to be regarding this amendment, understanding and knowing that it is not right, it is not just, it is not fair. Madam President, there are other ordinances that require the action of the leader of the opposition. There are other federal mandates that speak to the leader of the opposition. And so this attempt, Madam President, to deal with the issue in a piecemeal approach that does not further the objectives of our Constitution and the principles upon which this Honorable House was founded ought not to be passed in this Honorable House, Madam President. Thank you.
Recognize the member for Nevis Island.
Madam President, I rise to make my contribution to the bill that is presently before this Honorable House, the Integrity in Public Life Amendment Bill 2023. And, Madam President, you know, we ought not to have been here. We really ought not to have been here dealing with this amendment. I would say this, Madam President, that elections have consequences. Let me say that again. Elections have consequences, Madam President. And I want to say to the good people of St. James's, Nevis number 4, that I do not believe, Madam President, that when they went to the polls on the 12th of December and elected the member of the Nevis Reformation Party, that they would have thought that we would have been in Parliament dealing with the consequence of that election and the confusion that has been created, Madam President. Madam President, I agree with the Premier, you know, or the member for Nevis number 2, that this is as a result of a failure of leadership. And Madam President, Yuval Noah Harari is an Israeli author, public intellectual, a historian, and a professor in the Department of History at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And in an interview, Madam President, recently on MSNBC, the good professor states, and I quote, "Peace is based on compromise." Peace, Madam President, is based on compromise. Now, over the last year, Madam President, we have seen the kind of war, literal war, that has taken place between the members opposite. Why? They are not prepared to compromise. Failure of leadership. Madam President, we ought not to have been here. We ought not to have been here. Madam President, the member for number 4, and I asked my colleague, I whisper to my colleagues, please let me go after her. You know, let me speak after her. The member for Nevis number 4 stated that when this ordinance came into being in 2013, or passed in this House, there was no leader of the opposition. I hope I quoted you right. Was that a correct statement? You can't recall. Well, I wrote it down. Madam President, in 2013, who was the members opposite on the other side? Who? There was a leader of opposition in 2013, you know, Madam President. There was a leader of the opposition in 2013. And Madam President, it shows, Madam President, that it is because of the member opposite lack of history and knowledge and understanding of her own very party. She does not realize, or she did not realize, that in 2013, the former member, or the previous former member for number 4 was the leader of the opposition. Number 5, sorry, was the leader of the opposition, supported by, what's his name? Elhansville Roberto Hector. They were in Parliament on that side when this legislation was passed in this honorable House.
Madam President, point of order regarding the ordinance that was passed in 2013 but was not brought into force until 2018 when there was no appointed leader of the opposition in the Nevis Island Assembly. Thank you.
Madam President, my argument and my point is that when this ordinance was passed in this honorable House, there was a leader of the opposition supported by another member on the opposition side. When it came into force, that's a different story, and we can have that conversation. The point I am making, Madam President, is that the then leader and the then former representative of St. Paul's could have took this legislation and tore it to shreds. But what? It was passed in Parliament. So what is the argument? Madam President, the member opposite stated that the commission is not, that we are blaming her that the commission is not constituted because of NRP. We're not blaming her, it's a fact. It is a fact. The member for number 2, Madam President, went through how one becomes the leader of the opposition and the entire process. And he did it eloquently, Madam President. Well, who is on the opposition side? CCM can be on both sides. We are on the government side, they are on the opposition side. When this parliament was constituted after the December 12th election, there were 2 members opposite from the NRP. So who are we to blame? Well, now we have one. Because of the failure of leadership, the other one have summarily been asked to leave the NRP. Madam President. Madam President, I listened in amazement, and the member for number 4 said that this ordinance shows a lack of consideration for the people of Nevis. I took some notes. Lack of consideration for the people of Nevis. You know, Madam President, it could have been very easy for us to say that we don't have a leader of the opposition, so leave the integrity in public life on the shelf.
Maybe that's what they want.
We could have done that, you know. We could have said, no leader, they can't agree, they can't come to an agreement as to who they so leave the. But no, we said no, this is too important, Madam President, to the island and to the people of leadership. Lack of consideration. Madam President, it is because of the consideration that we have for the people of Nevis that we are seeking to do what they can't do. That is what we are here for. They can't agree. Madam President, it is amazing. It is amazing that the honorable member for number 4, I've said, she used the language that this is the laughing stock. And, Madam President, I don't like the idea of people laughing after me because it is not a good feeling. But that was the language that the honorable member for Nevis number 4 used in Parliament. That this ordinance have becoming, putting us to be the laughing stock. Madam President, I received a very interesting telephone call from a friend of mine in Jamaica. And very good friend. I cannot repeat what was said in Parliament, Madam President, but let me summarize. The long and the short of it was that the members on the opposition side need to understand that they play a pivotal and a critical role in democracy. If there is anybody, Madam President, who is making this Parliament a laughing stock, let them look on that side of the House. Let them look on that side of the House. Because, Madam President, on the 12th of December, we had an election. They won 2 seats, and shortly after, they lose 1 seat, and then all hell break loose. If that is parliamentary language, Madam President. And you can correct me.
It's a real place.
Sorry?
Hell is a real place.
I know that. But Madam President, Madam President, the member for number 5 made a statement in Parliament, some people, how do you think about it? Charge you, Minister? Some people come in so. Huh? Do I need to repeat it, Madam President? That is why we are here. The Constitution, Madam President, provides for a leader of the opposition. And there are times, Madam President, when it is silent on certain situations and circumstances. But I believe, Madam President, that the framers of the Constitution gave a clear indication of the importance of the leader of the opposition. And for the life of me, Madam President, you hear what Mr. Harari said? Peace is based on compromise. I sit in a cabinet, Madam President. I have a constituency to represent, and I have to compromise at times. I don't get everything that I want. The member for number 3 don't get everything he wants. The leader of the government and premier don't always get everything he wants. The 2 junior, they don't get everything that they want. And we have to wrestle at times, Madam President, for what it is that we don't always get it. But does that mean that we must mash up the thing? Does that mean we must destroy the whole thing, Madam President? Because we don't get our way? Well, that too. Huh? It's like, Madam President, you have a house. You have a window that is not in the best of condition. What you going to do? Knock down the whole house instead of replacing the window? And say that the house is no good because the window is damaged? Madam President, that is what has happened here. That is what has happened here. And I want to say to the people of number 4, I believe that after the 12th of December, 2022, some would have reflected and some would have had deep introspection as to what would have transpired. I want to give them a little message, Madam President. I guarantee them that if the former member of Nevis number 4 was in this parliament, we would not have been here. We would not have been here. There would not have been this kind of confusion. That's why I say, Madam President, elections have consequences. And I want to say to the people of Nevis number 4, and when the time comes around, I'm asking them to grant me a little favor, to change the change. That's all I'm asking. Change the change. Because this confusion and this lack of understanding as to the important role that a leader of a major political party on Nevis plays, like, they don't understand it, can't comprehend it. Madam President, we have, I believe, a number of other ordinances that there ought to be some consultation with the leader of the opposition. Are we going to be back in this parliament next week to amend because those on the other side can't get their act together? Are we going to wait, Madam President, until the country is in a major crisis where the leader of government has to consult with the leader of the opposition to bring relief to the people of Nevis? I am simply saying to them, get their act together. This is serious business, you know, Madam President. Madam, this amendment to this legislation, Madam President, is unfortunate. And unfortunate in the sense that we really ought not to have been here. And I look at the language, and I believe that the good folks at the legal department had difficulty in drafting this piece of amendment. How can we fashion an amendment to an ordinance, Madam President, to try and cover for the inability, Madam President, of those on the other side to get the act together? That is what we are trying to do. Trying to do the right thing, but at the same time, we are trying to ensure that we position the ordinance in such a way that the ordinance can be effective, Madam President. Madam President, I got in a little late this morning because I was at a function with the Japanese ambassador. And when I came in, I saw a good friend of mine outside with a placard. Start early. And I spot a word on the placard, Madam President, unconstitutional. I wonder if I should go down that road here. I wonder if I should. What I would say, Madam President, let me say this, that the member for Nevis number 2 is not unconstitutional because after the election of December 12th, I know that I had to have a conversation, Madam President, with the Deputy Governor General, advising the Deputy Governor General that I support the gentleman to be the Premier of the country. When we look on the other side, I believe that the Deputy Governor General is still waiting. Still waiting after almost 12 months for somebody to say to her that they have the support to be the leader of the opposition. So when they're talking about unconstitutional, not on this side, let them look on that side over there. Madam President, I believe that it is really unfortunate that we are in this parliament to deal with this particular amendment. I agree with our leader. It is as a result of the failure of leadership of the NRP. I agree, Madam President, with the good professor that it is as a result of the inability to compromise, Madam President. And I agree, Madam President, with the member for number 5, that some people come into things that they don't understand. And that is why we are here trying to nudge them to do their job and to do what they ought to do. I will end, Madam President, by once again saying to the people of St. James's, number 4, I don't know them to be confusion people. So when the time comes, make sure that they change the change, Madam President. Thank you, and may it please you.
Madam President, pleasant good afternoon to all. I rise in support of the bill before this Honorable House, the Integrity in Public Life Amendment Bill 2023. And, Madam President, it's with a bit of reluctance, that I have come. Not because I don't want to support the bill, but the fact is that this present bill, if the House and the Assembly was operated in the spirit within which the Assembly should be operating, we wouldn't need to be here for this particular bill. And normally when we have bills, I like to get myself well read up, and I like to prepare myself to speak. I couldn't really do it on this ordinance, on this bill. But while I was there, I sat down and I scribbled a few things. And, the thought that kept coming to the fore for me was, how does one defend the indefensible? How? And I've thought about it. How do you defend the indefensible? And the truth and the matter is that you don't. And I want to believe that's why we only have one person sitting on the opposition side today, because I believe at least one person on the opposition side realizes that you don't defend the indefensible. And therefore, they have left it, because really and truly, we are here because of a failure of the opposition to come together and act civilly, to be responsible. I mean, you come before the people to seek the support of the people. And when people put themselves up in front of the people to seek to represent people, then I think the general public expects that they have people of a certain caliber that's coming. They expect that they have people who are going to take the work seriously, people who are serious about representing the public. I think the member for Nevis 2 said earlier that it's not everybody who's going to get an opportunity to be a member of the House. I've been a member for, I think, about 10 years. It's a privilege. I've been nominated. The people haven't sent me yet. Hopefully sometime in the near future, or the distant future. Whatever it might be, I'm content. I don't know, but, you know, I got patience. You know, sometimes people come to you and they try to tell you all kind of thing. Because, you know, they want to get under your skin and they want you to do like maybe some others would have done in the past, but I believe in being patient because I realize that on the other side of the thing is pure confusion. It's pure confusion, and the people of Nevis should not be exposed to that confusion. You see, Madam President, we're talking about integrity in public life, and that is what we should all strive to have, all of us who come into public life. And you know, for the whole life of the Federation, and certainly for the whole life of the Nevis Island Administration, it was a CCM government who decided that we should bring legislation to legislate for integrity in public life. Nobody thought it was needed or necessary before. It was a CCM government who did it. And here we are in 2023. Yes, some people don't want the commission to operate because when you really think about it, that is what it comes down to. You see, in 2013, I think this was Ordinance number 2, was the second piece of legislation that we sought to pass. And then it was activated under a newly constructed government in June of 2018. And since that, we've been doing our filings since 2019. It is something that is necessary for the good running of the government. You see, Madam President, sometimes you really have to look into things. Persons were in government before. Government didn't start in Nevis in 2013. Government didn't just start. People were in before. We had lots of things happening in government. I remember that we had a government in Nevis that came in 2006. People said persons in the government could work miracles and so. We used to hear that. I remember that going through the numbers, because I like to look at numbers and so on. I remember that before that government, that our total public debt in Nevis, our government debt was around 200 million. I remember the debt was almost doubled by the time we got to 2013, just some, I think, 5 years and 18 null and void months of that government. Yeah, doubled. And I remember there was this overdraft thing that before that government, the overdraft was just about 20 million. The overdraft went up to 70 million, was converted to a loan, and then within the space of 10 months, was back up at $65 million again. That was some reckless spending. Where was the integrity in public life to check some of that spending? It was non-existent at the time. And these are the things that persons who are in this government now, who were in opposition, were looking at and were crying out about. And that is why we felt it was important. It was important that one of the first orders of business should be integrity in public life. And you know, this is why we're here today. Yes, I remember that. No audited accounts. None whatsoever. During the entire 5 years and 18 null and void months. No audited accounts. It was what you would call a free-for-all. You understand? But some people don't seem to know that these things happened. Or maybe it's not important. Because maybe what's important is looking down the road to see how far down the road they could get. You know, people have to be very, very careful. I heard the member for Nevis once say, just a while ago when he spoke, that elections are important because elections have consequences. You see, if people want to run government, people want to run the country, and you get the people to vote for you, and you can't even manage over in opposition. How on earth are you going to manage in government? How on earth are you going to manage to run the island? So when there is a problem, when there is some sort of dispute among those sitting in there, well, what's going to happen? We have seen the template, and you know, it is a sad, sad, sad template that the people of Nevis have seen. And you know, when people show you who they are, you better believe them. Don't give them an opportunity. Do not give them an opportunity to actually do it to everybody. We have seen who they are. We have seen it. How do you come and defend the indefensible? And I keep saying there is no defense at all for it. None whatsoever. Because we are only here because the opposition cannot get along. There are two members in the opposition. They should have been able to compromise. Compromise and come up with a senator. Compromise and come up with a leader. Compromise and be able to appoint somebody to the Integrity Commission. Now the leader of the opposition has said this morning, and the member for Nevis 4, rightfully has said, and I made a little note, that when, oh my, you see, that is how it's supposed to be, you know? That is how it's supposed to be, so forgive me. You can't help it because you expect it to be so. But what was said is that when something starts wrong, it will end wrong. And I took a note of it because that is very, very true. And everybody in Nevis have seen what has happened when they get to win a little seat and they get a little bit of power. Now, I don't know what all the issues were. I don't know what was going on, why people get along, why people can't get along, and so on. And I think, for me, it's not that important. And I think for the people of Nevis, it shouldn't be that important. People who are at this level, that they come out and they ask the general public to give them their support, should have that level of maturity that they could keep those things on the low and go out and put out a united front and do the work of the people, because it's the work of the people that they were elected to do. When people elect people, they expect them to act a certain way and on a certain level. And sadly, we have not been able to see that. So I want to agree that when something starts wrong, it will end wrong. And you know, we are here this morning, not because of anything that, well, this afternoon, it has already turned to afternoon, not because of anything that we over here have done. We are not here to give the Premier more power. Some persons out there for the past couple of weeks have been on the radio saying that we're trying to give the Premier more power. Well, let me ask, if the opposition is able to get along, then What is the Premier going to do? The Premier is going to appoint the one person who he can appoint, and the opposition will appoint the other person. How does the Premier get any more power? And persons have been walking around and saying that we are coming here to give the Premier more power. But you know, I saw a picture the other day with a quote next to it. And you know what the quote said? If clueless was a person. You understand? That is what the quote said. If clueless was a person. And there's a picture going around right now with people with placards and so on, and that is the same quote that has come to mind. If clueless was a person. You understand, Madam President? Because I don't see how us coming here with this one-page amendment is somehow trying to give the Premier more power. That is nonsense. We are coming here because the opposition cannot get their act together, because they cannot function. And so we therefore have to find a way around something that nobody could have thought would have happened when we were trying to frame this ordinance in the first place. Nobody could have expected that. I mean, you could have expected that at some point in time the opposition might only win one seat, or they might win none at all. You could expect that, and the Constitution, as the mover of the bill said earlier this morning, the Constitution provided for that. But nobody could have expected that you got two elected members from the same party and they cannot find any common ground. You understand? Nobody could have expected that. But, Madam President, I will say this afternoon, I will say that, you see, power is a funny thing. And you see, when people come together and they say that they are working for a common cause that is supposed to be in the best, I pause on that, for a reason. You see, when people tell you that they are working together and that somehow they are supposed to be working or looking out for the best interests of the people as a whole, you got to look at them. You got to look at how they treat their people. You got to look at how they treat the people that they're supposed to be working with. You got to look at it, because the truth be told, Madam President, that two persons can be working together, or three or four or five, or a group, and you got some persons in the group plotting the demise of somebody else in the group. It's not going to work out right. It can work right that if all of us are in a group together, working in one accord, are supposed to be working in one accord. But then you have Mary, Susie, John, and James, right? And they're plotting the demise of one of their members. Well, what is one of the first things we learn about Nevis? One of the first things, I think everybody in Nevis know it, not a thing is confidential. Nevis people love to talk. So somebody can come back and say, Mary, they're plotting your demise over there, Or you expect Mary gonna then work with Sue? Can't happen. Can't happen. So when people working together, they really should be working together. There should be some openness and some honesty. People should be able to put their differences aside to work for the benefit of the country. You understand? And so if people can't even work together in a small group, then how can we expect them to be able to work on behalf of the people? If they're already, without having any power, already plotting the downfall of people on the inside, what do you think they're going to do with the people on the outside? And these are the things that we have playing out right now. You know, and we can't sugarcoat it, because this is exactly what it is. The Constitution is the highest law of the land. As the member for Nevis too said, when it was done, some of us weren't born yet. Some of us were young men and boys, and some of us were babies. I was a baby. So I didn't have anything to do with the writing of the Constitution. But we have been working and making the best of the Constitution that we have, because it's difficult to change the Constitution. And from here on Nevis, and from here in this honorable house, I don't think we can change the Constitution here. There is nothing that we can do here in Nevis to change the Constitution. So guess what? We got to work with it. We got to find ways to work with it as is. We can't get up and throw a tantrum and say, well, the Constitution ain't how I want it to be, so I ain't doing it. We can't do that. Well, suppose the government over here decide, well, we come to an impasse, so we stop running the country. You could imagine? You could imagine? No, that is why you need mature and responsible people in government. And the people of Nevis need to take notice, because as the member for Nevis said when she spoke earlier, when something starts wrong, it will end wrong. You understand? That is the quotation. And, Madam President, I got another quotation, and I think this is a famous one now, that sums up the whole problem, sums up the whole reason why we are here. Very famous quote now. And I think we first heard it in this honorable house. When people come to things that they don't understand, that is why things just end up how they end up. You understand, Madam President? That is why we are here. The simple amendment, if there is no leader of the opposition, or if there is nobody on the opposition who could come to consensus, then the Premier would appoint. But that's like a sudden death situation. It only happens, Madam President, that only happens if there is no consensus on the opposition, or if there is nobody at all on the opposition. And Madam President, we over here, on this side, on the government side, do not determine or do not have any control over the opposition having consensus. That is a matter for the opposition, okay? So in closing, Madam President, I want to wish the amendment safe passage to the House, and I want the people of Nevis to remember that when something starts wrong, it will end wrong. Thank you.
Madam President, I rise in support of the amendment. I didn't intend really to speak on this amendment, but I had to rise and just give, I'm going to be brief, because I think the members on this side who spoke did such an excellent job that maybe I did not have to rise, but I thought it best that I rise to support. Because the opening batsman did an amazing job in putting things in context. And then the other two batsmen did an equally amazing job. And so the game has been won. But I decided I had to put in my 2 cents. Because I think I left my amendment here. Madam President, I just needed to react to a few things. Because the member opposite, the member for Nevis 4, said that the amendment is trying to exclude opposition members. I want to read this again, because I don't have the Premier read it as good as I think I'm going to read it now. So I'm going to read it again for persons who are listening and persons who are following online. If there is no leader of the opposition, let me take my time. If there is no leader of the opposition, then the Deputy Governor General may appoint a member on the advice of the member or members of the opposition, provided that where there is no member of the opposition or the members of the opposition cannot agree on the nominee, then a member will be appointed on the advice of the Premier after consultation with the members of the opposition, if any. Madam President, this is clearly stating that there will be consultation with the member or the members of the opposition by the Deputy Governor General, and then it says by the Premier. And so if it comes to a case where the members of the opposition cannot agree, and they have not agreed on anything since the last election, I don't think so. If they cannot agree, then it comes back to the Premier appointing. But that is the last resort, Madam President, the absolute last resort. And the member for Nevis 2 would have pointed out many times when he was here that this piece of legislation or this amendment is putting the ball squarely in the court of the opposition members. The ball is in your court now. That is why we are here. We are not here to say, well, the Premier is going to appoint somebody. We have come here to the House to tell you that you have another chance. The situation as it exists now, there is no leader of the opposition. And we accept that. And so you cannot appoint anyone. This amendment that we are here today discussing and debating is suggesting to you, the members who sit on the opposition benches, that you have another chance to do so. And you must take advantage of that chance that this piece of amendment is affording you. You can't be blaming us over here if you can't agree. That is exactly what you have come to this House today to do. To blame us for all of the drama that has unfolded in your party since the election last year. You can't come here to blame us for your drama. There's no drama over here, you know. No drama on this side. Absolutely none. And I mean, I am disappointed because when the opposition member, when the member for Nevis 4 says that the Premier is dictatorial, I mean, where in the legislation, where in the amendment you see any issue with regard to dictatorship? Madam President, we are here to discuss integrity in public life. Integrity in public life. And over here on this side, integrity is what upholds us over here. And, Madam President, if there's a dictator a dictator would not want an integrity in public life ordinance. Everything we do on this side is transparent. Transparent. Since we have taken government, the only premier to have a press conference every month, he having his press conference on Thursday. Everything we do is transparent, Madam President. And so you cannot come here to say or accuse the Premier and the member for Nevis too, or accuse our government of being dictatorial in any way. If we were dictatorial, Madam President, we would not have come here to this honorable House with this piece of amendment. We would to give the opposition another chance. And so I am pleading with the members of the opposition. One is here right now, the other is not here. I hope she is listening. I am pleading with you all to sit down and do your job that the people of Nevis 4 and Nevis 5 voted for you to do. Do the job that the people of 4 and 5 place their confidence in you to do. And I will say further that if...
Address your comments through the chair.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. And I would say further, Madam President, that if the members for Nevis 4 and Nevis 5 cannot take up the ball that has been thrown in their court and use it, they would have failed their constituents miserably. I'm going to say that again. If they cannot take up that ball and have a consensus and come up with a nominee or an appointment for the Integrity Commission, they would have failed the people of Nevis 4 and the people of Nevis 5. I want us all to recognize, Madam President, that what we have seen in this honorable House since the elections of December 12, 2022 is historic, you know. Unprecedented. It has never happened. We've had cases where the opposition had 2 members and they were able to agree. They were able to have a leader of the opposition. They were able to appoint a senator. And this is historic. And now they're coming here to blame us. Coming here to blame this ocean liner over here, which is sailing so good and have no drama and have no confusion. We have never seen this level of confusion in a party before. And we have to call it for what it is. We have never seen it. Leader can't lead. We have never seen it, Madam President. And we cannot come here to try to blame this side for the confusion and the drama that has unfolded and has led to why we are here. I am very busy, you know, I have a lot of things in my office to do. I could have been in my office doing my work. I could have been out doing some work. Other members are busy. But we had to come here, Madam President, because 2 members of the same party can't agree. Never happened. Never ever happened before. And Madam President, I once again am calling on those members to come together. Come together. Take up the ball that has been thrown in your court and compromise and come with an appointment for the Integrity Commission. Because we are doing all of this because this is a government that all we want to do is to govern the affairs of Nevis in a proper manner. And integrity in public life ordinance is part of that good governance pillar. And that is why it was passed, and that is why it was operationalized under a CCM-led administration. With those few words, Madam President, I wish this amendment safe passage to this honorable House.
Madam President, I rise with your leave to lend my support to this bill. As mentioned earlier by my colleagues, I had no intention of contributing to this debate today because I anticipated that it would have such smooth passage through this honorable House. I took advantage of this opportunity to speak, however, because throughout the discussions I realized what a privilege it is for me to be here, appointed as a senator on the government benches. Potential senators for the opposition bench was not so lucky, and thus I must embrace this opportunity to speak on behalf of the people of Nevis. Madam President, I truly believe that we would have been out of here in an hour maximum, because this bill, this amendment to this bill is so straightforward. The idea behind this bill to begin with was to ensure that there is integrity, fairness, transparency in public life, public office, and all those who hold it. We recognize, because of some breakdown in communication on the other side, that we were not able to execute this mandate that is so important to those on the government benches. We value the ability to be able to have those checks and balances. So when I hear one of the members opposite note that, I don't want to misquote, so when I hear one of the members opposite, indicate that they would not want to be associated with a legislation like this, I have to pause and make my input, because I want to be associated with a legislation like this. And I personally believe that anyone in public life who does not possibly have something to hide if you don't want to support a bill such as this. Madam President, it was discussed through and through that up until this point, this, if not the letter, the spirit of this bill has been thoroughly executed throughout the years. When there was the previous member for Nevis 5 on the opposition benches, he would have acted in a responsible manner. He would have communicated and done what was necessary for the people of Nevis 5. And that's good, because I grew up in Nevis 5. So he would have communicated and ensured that not only their voices were represented, but the opposition voice was represented, because he would have seen the value in that. Unfortunately, at this point, we have two members on the opposite side who has the capacity and the ability to nominate and have appointed a leader of the opposition, but they have failed and continue to fail to do so. Because there was no timeline on this, they can still, Madam President, get their act together, grow up, and make that recommendation. I say grow up. I'm young, as it would have indicated earlier. I was not alive when the Constitution was being created. So I came into this honorable House as, the youngest member. And I expected an example to be set. And I appreciate my colleagues on the government benches, because they have been setting said example. I am, however, disappointed by my colleagues on the opposition benches, as I anticipated that this House would be fully constituted. I'd be able to refer to my senator on the opposite side as well, and we'd be able to have robust debate for the betterment of the country. But because of a failure to come together and put the interests of the people of Nevis first, we simply do not have that today, Madam President. So, Madam President, when I hear talks about this being an attempt at dictatorship. I know the member for Nevis 3 went into teacher mode just a while ago, and he would have gone over the bill because it is impossible that anyone who read the amendment to this bill that they would say this is an attempt at dictatorship. The door was wide open for this to become a case where we can take over and make it a case of dictatorship. It was spread open first. It was like, here, welcome, come in, take control. But that is not the intention of the members on this side. We continue to try and uphold the basic principles of fairness and integrity and inclusion. So I think, even though we say we don't deserve any blame, I think we have to take some of the blame on this side. Because we keep expecting better, Madam President. We keep expecting better. And this bill proves, this amendment proves that we keep expecting better. So we made provisions, Madam President, for the leader of the opposition to nominate a member to the commission. That is simple. One member support another member, have a leader of the opposition put in place, and they nominate a member. That's the first step. Okay? Failure to do so, Madam President, we didn't say, okay, they failed at that, or they will continue to fail at that, so throw that away. We said, okay, let's give a second chance, Madam President. And we go. If there is no leader of the opposition, then the Deputy Governor General may appoint a member on the advice of the member or members of the opposition, provided that where there is no member of the opposition or members of the opposition cannot agree on a nominee, then a member will be appointed on the advice of the Premier after consultation with the members of the opposition, if any. So, Madam President, first, the leader of the opposition has the chance. Then if you decide to waste that chance, we still have faith on this side. We have faith that adults will do what adults need to do, and leaders will do what leaders need to do, which is to lead. So we put another mechanism in place. Come together, have a conversation, agree on someone. We have a population of near 12,000 plus. Agree on an appropriate individual and recommend that individual to the Governor General. Madam President, the member opposite for Nevis 4 has more or less already declared to us that that will not happen. Before any conversation has been had, we have basically heard, nope, we will not agree on anything, we will not do this. And so,
Madam President, I know what I would have said earlier in this House, and I do not understand why one would say what I was probably thinking if I did not make an explicit statement regarding my intentions. Madam President, the remarks with regards to the lack of rationale or reasoning for my use of the term dictatorial, Madam President, it is clear in the amendment that is presented that if the NRP wins 5 seats in the next election, then there would be no provision for members on the other side to nominate a commissioner. And so, Madam President, as it is right now, based on the provision speaks only to opposition members. And so if one party happens to win all 5 seats and there are no opposition members, then that party must be excluded from any discussions or dialogue with regards to this particular amendment? Because as was said before, just as a matter of clarification, this is not the only bill that speaks to the leader of the opposition. And so I just wanted to make a point, Madam President, regarding what I said, not what people imagine that I would have said. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam President, that intervention brings me to my next point. We cannot conflate representation in the Nevis Island Assembly with party politics.
That's right.
We cannot conflate what happens here in the Nevis Island Assembly with party politics. The member for Nevis 2 explained how in here, everyone, outside of yourself, we are equal, we are on equal footing. So we cannot make provision, and we should not make provisions in the law to recognize one party outside of over the other. Madam President, multiple parties come up every day. The member for Nevis 5, who is now an independent candidate, might launch her own party. So we cannot make provisions for parties in the Nevis Island Assembly. We have to make provision for representatives. Currently, we have representatives in the opposition, and so we're ensuring that we put 1 step, 2 step, 3 steps in place to give them a fair chance at representation in government, in this House of Assembly, and in leading the people of Nevis. Those who were not elected, nominated, they have to make their contributions in different ways. Make their contributions again at the next election. Make them when we have general consultations. Make them when you see us on the street. But here in the House of Assembly, we can only make provisions for those who are nominated and elected to be here. And that is what we're doing.
Easy peasy.
So, Madam President, I think it's been said. We know why we're here. We're here because there's been a breakdown in leadership. There's been a breakdown in communication. There's been a breakdown in the ability to compromise and come to a middle ground on the other side. But we're given another chance, and we'll see if that pans out. But in the event that it does not, then I am certain in the leadership of the current Premier. And so this commission will, in fact, be properly constituted at the end of the day. Madam President, I raise one more issue. I note that there's also comparisons being made with the federal Integrity in Public Life Bill. I think we can all recognize and appreciate the uniqueness of Nevis. That is why we wear the flag pin separately. That's why the flag stands here in the Honorable House. We recognize in the very same Constitution that was referenced multiple times that I was not privy to be alive for, but I uphold the value of. So we recognize that Nevis exists within the Federation, but it is unique, and we have unique needs that we sometimes have to make provisions for. Some good, and some include a breakdown on the other side. So this might not be the case in the federal government, where there is a constituted opposition leader, because they could come together and indicate that support. So they did not have this need that we have currently in Nevis. And when we have a need in Nevis, we don't sit back and wait. We step forward and we aim to fix it. And that is exactly what we are here to do. And so, Madam President, I will end by wishing this bill safe passage through this honorable House. Thank you.
Madam President, I rise after fulsome debate. I think every member who's present and has the right to speak did, in fact, speak, and I believe that the contributions all have been noted by the public. I have seen some commentary already, and it is a matter which, notwithstanding the bill itself is quite short, it clearly is a matter which has attracted a lot of attention. I should just respond very briefly to say to the member opposite that the suggestion that the matter would have been presented for first reading and then we would have gone to elicit public opinion because, as the member put it, she was not alerted to the fact that there was any public consultation, meaning perhaps there was no town hall or anything. That, as I indicated, Madam President, when I introduced the second reading, that we had had feedback. In fact, the public ought to know that the bill that we are seeking to pass today is fundamentally different to what had been proposed. And this is a result of the feedback that we got. Our constituents and others would have come forward and said, listen, this is what we suggest. How can we make it better? And we as a government listen. And so we have come with something today which is different in nature and which we feel gives the opportunity for balance. And that's what we're seeking to achieve. Now, I have heard words thrown around and accusations levied. But the reality is that if the opposition members had done what they were supposed to do, there would have been no need for us to be here. Because somebody over there would have been leader of the opposition, somebody over there would have had a senator appointed, somebody over there would have advised the Deputy Governor General of who the member of the Integrity Commission should be. The fact that they chose not to have their house in order means that there was no leader of the opposition. And it is apparent, and I want to agree with the member, senator, here on our side, that my interpretation, language is used to convey meaning. And my interpretation of what the good member for number 4 has said to the House today, by accusing the Premier of Nevis of seeking somehow to grab power and using words like dictatorial, that she has already determined that she is not going to agree to any member to go on the commission. To me, it is obvious. Why do I say that? Because the structure of what we are proposing today is to say the third member of the commission will be appointed on the advice of the leader of the opposition. If there is none, then the third member will be appointed on the advice of the member or members of the opposition. Only if there is no member or members of the opposition, or they cannot agree. That is the only time the Premier gets involved. So when I hear this chatter about the Premier trying to do this and the Premier trying to do that, the leader of the opposition, if tomorrow they could get their house in order and there's a leader of the opposition, problem solved. Absent that, the two members must speak to each other. The language I heard was to grow up. This is not children melee, you know. Grow up, speak to each other, focus on the people's business. Suppress your personal dislike and personal whatever. The people of St. James and the people of St. Thomas's are who you should be focused on. So they must talk to each other and come up with somebody who they say is their nominee. only if they fail to do that. Does the Premier have to step in? Because if I don't step in, well, how is the Commission going to get constituted? We cannot allow the Integrity Commission to be held hostage by the dysfunctional nature of the opposition. So if they do not agree, that is the only time at which the Premier, and even then, the law is saying the Premier should consult with the opposition. I don't know what else could any government be asked to do. What else can we be asked to do? And I personally, Madam President, if I'm a little, I don't want to use the word emotional, but if I'm a little shrill, it is because I don't like when people create their confusion and try to blame me for their confusion. I don't have nothing to do with NRP. Nothing to do with them. We went into an election. The election was determined. They start with their confusion early o'clock. And now the consequences of that confusion are being laid bare for everybody to see. They start to cost the government. What is that? We never created their confusion. We are now trying, forced you, everybody over here said they have work to do. I'm sure, Madam President, you have work to do. The good clerk who's here, all of us in here. We are forced to be here. Because they cannot get their house in order, we have now to come and create a workaround. That's really what is happening, you know. We are creating a workaround. We are saying, well, we expected that this would be the position, but since there's some growing up that is necessary, that hasn't happened, let us come back in the House and ensure that the work of the Integrity Commission is not stymied. Now I hear them talk about some of their commentators about corruption and all kind of thing on our side. Oh, it would have been an easy thing for us to say, well, the Integrity Commission can't function. NRP not appointing any person, the opposition not appointing any person, so let us just leave that on the shelf. To the contrary, we ask the legal department, we say we need to solve this because the Integrity Commission must function. Does that sound like a government which is trying to hide things? Must function. And one must wonder. One must wonder, you know, because, as I said, sometimes you have to look for meaning. Whether or not it is possible that some other people don't want the commission to function. I know I could say, before God and man, my hands are clean. I don't have to worry about that. I don't have to look over my shoulder. I sleep very good at nights. So I know I can file and I have no problem. If they have questions, that they come and ask me. Everything I have, I work for. Let them come and ask me. I have no difficulty. But one must now start to wonder whether some don't want the commission to be constituted, don't want the commission to function. You hear them come in and say, oh, the commission, it was, what is that? Start wrong? Well, if it started wrong, the elections of December 12th last year gave an opportunity to correct all the wrong. Why do I say that? Because unlike in 2018 when there was only one member opposite, they now have two.
That's right. Strengthen your hand.
And all that it needed is for two people to do the right thing and to set aside whatever it is that they have and focus on the people who they're supposed to represent. This House could have benefited from the richness of a senator on the other side. Madam President, we have budget coming up. Could have benefited if you bring somebody in here with some gravitas and some experience and can contribute. Could have benefited. But the country is being deprived of a senator opposite. Were they going to blame us for that too? I am hearing the discussion saying that I must try to amend the Constitution. Well, I'm happy that the good senator here on our benches, Honorable Troy Liebert, made the point that we can't amend the Constitution from Nevis, Madam President. That's legal heresy. But you see what I said when you come to things that you don't understand? Because people who have not informed themselves, they have not equipped themselves, they have not prepared themselves for this journey. They just jump upon, they see me here, and somehow get people to vote for them. And they reach. And I'm saying, even if you reach through that way, well, Lord, take a chance and do some reading. You have people in this house who don't even know the history of the party that they represent. So when you hear some of the comments, you understand that they don't understand the history. They have not even taken the time because they were never interested in no politics. We know. You see what you call it, what Johnny Mary come lately? Mary come lately, last shower rain. They had no interest in this thing. And that is not, that's okay. You have come now. Well, inform yourself. Equip yourself. And perhaps some of the commentary that we would have heard could be avoided because people would come and we would do more here to educate each other and educate the listening public instead of what we have passing, which clearly is vacuous, empty, and without substance. Madam President, we cannot from Nevis amend the Constitution. We can only work with it and work within the confines. Any constitutional amendment would have to be proposed at the federal parliament. And we know how difficult it is because some aspects of our Constitution are entrenched, some are doubly entrenched. Some require 2/3 vote in the parliament. They require referenda, not just one, one in Sinkis and another one in Nevis, both of which must get 2/3. So when I hear people out there talking and saying that the Constitution, which was drafted by whom? NIA was involved in the drafting of the Constitution. We weren't around then. So you've produced a document, and I'm not knocking the document. It is what it is. It has served us well. But let us be sensible in terms of our discussions with our public and not create this fantasy that somehow we have the power over here to amend the Constitution. Give the leader of the opposition to somebody. Who are we going to give it to? We have 2 members over there, one from 4 and one from 5. What am I going to do? Close my eyes and say, eeny, meeny, miny, mo? Spin a coin? Because as there is a God above, all of us in here know, and all of us on this island know, that if the member for number 4 was somehow to be declared leader of the opposition, the member for number 5 is going to say no. Member for number 4 win by how much? 8 votes? Number 5 win by 200 and something. She going to say no. And if by some wave of a magic wand, the member for number 5 were to be declared leader of the opposition, the member for number 4 going to say tal. No. So how I get into that? How the government get into that? Let us put the responsibility where the responsibility lies. And it lies at the feet of the opposition. And the lack of leadership that the opposition has had. It's a failure of leadership. Don't come trying to blame us. We're not involved with the opposition and we don't involve ourselves in their business. If they can't get their house in order, and that point is made, and it has been made so eloquently by the speakers before me on my side, the government side, that if you can't manage small things, how are you going to manage big things? Think government easy? Think government easy? And when you come to it because you're only interested in a title, oh, I'm the Premier of Nevis. That's what you're interested in. You have no interest in the difficulties. You have not even taken the time to learn how government functions. Because you just jump up one morning and say, I wake up, let me try a thing. And that is the reality of what we face here. If you cannot manage small things, you can't run a party. You're going to run Nevis. How? Can't happen. Nevis, you deal with different people from across all parties. Some are CCM, some are NRP, some are no party at all. And some CCM today and NRP tomorrow. How are you going to run Nevis? It's a failure of leadership, and we must call it for what it is. And stop the pretense that somehow it's the government's fault. It's not our fault. And we are here to try and fix it, to give the opposition yet another opportunity. The point, Madam Senator, is well made. Yet another opportunity to appoint somebody to the Integrity Commission. Now, will they take that opportunity? Or will they squander the opportunity? Because the Integrity Commission could have tomorrow a member appointed by the opposition if there can be consensus among them. And I'm here to say, and I'm not shy to say it, if they can't get the house in order, I will make the necessary recommendation to the Deputy GG so that the commission can do its work. Nevis cannot be held hostage by a dysfunctional opposition. The days for that are done, are over. We've been waiting and waiting and waiting. We have come now to create a mechanism to allow us to move forward. And so I wish this bill safe passage. I believe that the case has been made as to why we're here and why we need the amendments in order to allow the commission to function. May it please you.
May we just have another member from the government side to actually second the motion?
Madam President, I rise to second the motion.
The question is that the bill, shortly entitled the Integrity in Public Life Amendment Bill 2023, be read a second time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill to amend the Integrity in Public Life Ordinance Cap 1.02 and for matters related thereto or connected therewith.
The bill has been read a second time. We'll press on and go straight into committee stage.
Clause 6.
The question is that Clause 6 stands part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 5.
The question is that Clause 5 stands part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 4.
The question is that Clause 4 stands part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 3.
In relation to Clause 3, we are proposing that the Roman numeral 2, that remains, one member appointed recognition leader of the opposition, and that there be now what is now Roman numeral 3 be renumbered C, so that it becomes 3(2)C. And then it continues if there's no leader of the opposition, etc. I don't know if I'm... so the the change would be that Roman numeral 3 becomes the letter C.
Yes. So in that case, what you call the intitulum, which says the principal ordinance is amended in section, that would just be 3(2).
It would be 3(2), yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, thank you. Actually, it would we also have to change as well. I'm sorry. Because it would not now be deleting subparagraph 2 in its entirety. But subparagraph 2 is going to remain.
Yeah, we just deleted
Right?
paragraph.
So all we're saying, the principal ordinance is amended in section 3(2) and replacing it with the following. So 3.2, I'm struggling. I don't think that works either. 3.2B.
This is correct, because what you amended is only this section. This is the only section. All of this is this correct. This is this section.
So it should be 3.2B. No, we're not amending 2, because this is remaining. What we're really doing is adding a C.
Yes.
So we're actually leaving the current section 3.2A and B, 1 and 2, and then we're adding a C.
Right.
So the question is, how do we describe it?
You put in a C.
So the principal ordinance amended in section 3.2.
2.
So I feel that we can actually take out the Roman numeral 2.
Yes.
So that this principal ordinance amended in section 3.2 by adding the following section C.
Right.
Yes.
We still need to have only one member.
No, but that's there already.
Yeah.
Is there already?
Yes. Oh, it's here already, so we're not taking out.
No. So we're leaving that, and the only amendment therefore is to add the C.
Okay.
Does that work, Madam President?
Yes.
Our legal advisor, we have
Yes.
principal ordinance amended section 3.2 by adding section
3.2, yeah.
3.2.
3.2, and in the amendment section, deleting B2. And it says by deleting subparagraph.
We're taking out all of that.
By,
So all it will now say the principal ordinance is amended in section 3.2 by inserting the following section.
By inserting section C.
Yeah. By inserting the following section. Huh?
Yes, so it becomes C.
C, right.
Right. So my note is the principal ordinance is amended in section 3.2 by inserting subsection C. And for completeness, if you wish, immediately after section 3.2B2. For the benefit of the members, would you wish for me to read it again, or should I just put the question?
I appreciate
Yes.
it, madam. Can you read it again?
So clause 3 would read, the principal ordinance is amended in section 3.2 by inserting subsection C immediately after section 3.2B2. And Roman numeral 2 will be deleted.
Yeah, so subsection.
3.2B2.
Okay.
So the question is that clause 3, as amended, stands part of the bill. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 2,
The question is that clause 2 stands part of the bill. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
clause 1,
The question is that clause 1 stands part of the bill. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
enacting clause,
The question is that the enacting clause forms part of the bill. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
title,
The question is that the title forms part of the bill. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. Thank you. The Honorable House resumes its sitting.
Madam President, I am happy to report that the bill shortly entitled Integrity in Public Life Amendment Bill 2023 has passed through the committee stage with some amendments, and I respectfully ask that the bill be read a third time and passed.
Madam President, I rise to second the motion.
question is that the bill, shortly entitled the Integrity in Public Life Amendment Bill 2023, be read a third time and passed. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
A bill to amend the Integrity in Public Life Ordinance Cap 1.02 and for matters related thereto and connected therewith.
The bill has been read a third time and passed.
Adjournment.
Madam President, I rise to move a motion that the House be adjourned sine die.
Madam President, I rise to second the motion.
Thank you. The question is that this honorable House be adjourned sine die. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. This honorable House stands adjourned.